see. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jack Bosley, and I'm going to be moderating this morning. There are going to be several experts in our chat this morning, so please go over there and introduce yourself and let us know if you have any questions. Before we begin and before I introduce our first guest this morning, I am going to play a short little video that kind of sets the context of the next 3 weeks, and then I'll come back and formally introduce our two presenters this morning. So let me go over here and hit play.
Yes. During the month of December, the CDLI team has developed 3 weekly sessions to meet the requests of teachers, coaches, and administrators. The first 30 minutes will be a quick overview of the deeper dives throughout the day. Then, the content leads and coaches will present content-specific sessions to build on the ideas discussed in the first 30 minutes. In the afternoon, we will have featured classroom teachers and coaches join us to share about their experiences with these resources during NTI. For the week of December 2nd on the Digital Learning Channel, we will feature examples of teachers and coaches building a positive classroom culture by utilizing routines and expectations which foster a sense of belonging during NTI. Routines and expectations that foster and elevate student voice will be shared so a positive NTI learning community is created. We all know that relationships and connectedness are essential for learning. Our featured teachers will share their successes in implementing these strategies during NTI. During the week of December 9th, the Digital Learning Channel will feature teachers and coaches enhancing engagement through discourse and rich tasks. These sessions will focus on how to balance synchronous and asynchronous opportunities to develop rich tasks that engage students during NTI. These presentations will also focus on how teachers are scheduling and utilizing the workshop model in the delivery of instruction. Our featured teachers will share their successes in implementing rich tasks that allow students to collaborate and engage in discourse. And finally, the week of December 16th will focus on student-centered practices for ownership and authentic assessment. Teachers and coaches will demonstrate how to nurture student ownership and how to create authentic opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning. Our featured teachers will share their successes of implementation and answer questions about how they develop these opportunities for students. Don't forget, if you want to see who is going to be presenting these 3 weeks on the JCPS Digital Learning Channel, you can go to jcps.me/NTI, click on the Teacher Toolkit, and click on the Live Virtual Learning Schedule. Here, you can see which teachers, which presenters will be going each day on December 2nd, December 9th, and December 16th.
All right, so get a little bit of context for what's going to be on the Digital Learning Channel for the next 3 weeks. I'm happy to be on this morning with Andrea Higdon and Christy Mudd, who are going to be talking about positive classroom community and culture. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to see you all here. Welcome back from Thanksgiving. It came at a perfect time for me. I'm Andrea Higdon, your elementary math lead. And as I paused on Thanksgiving, I just thought about how grateful I am for you all and the resilience and the creativity you've shown during this time. And I'm here with my friend Christy Mudd from Deeper Learning.
Yes, hi, I'm Christy Mudd. I am part of the Deeper Learning team this year. I mostly work with the AIS schools, so reach out to me if you'd like to chat about Deeper Learning. But I also collaborate with all teachers and with my team. So yes.
With that, I'll share my screen and we'll get started.
All right, sounds good, you all.
All right, Jack, help me out. Make sure I've got closed captions on and all the things. Right, we're here to talk about positive classroom community and culture. And while we think about, we've already built that community and culture, we've been building it for a while, but this is a time where we're resetting. We've just had a break, and when we're in brick and mortar, this is a perfect time to reset. And we know the explicit instruction this community is taking, especially with NTI. Below that, you see our 3 pillars. That's the foundation of JCPS. And everything goes through community. So we're here today to talk a little bit about that. So here are 3 guiding questions today. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment and pause and think with the lens of a student. I have witnessed you doing so many things amazingly well. And all I'm wondering is, what can we build on and do just a little bit more to reach one more child, a little bit more to accelerate their learning a little further? So with a kid in mind, look at these 3 questions and think, where might I want to take a nugget away today? As I rest on this slide, I love the quote in red. I'm going to read that aloud. Experimenting and learning by doing is the only way to find the right combination, but that requires us to be open and willing to get it wrong and not shoot for doing it all at once. That quote is packed with philosophy and good advice. I think about the first 2 pieces, open and willing to get it wrong, and that's really that growth mindset. And I've witnessed you model that over and over again, and so we're seeing that reflected with our kids and their work. And then the not shooting to do it all at once. That's something that we can quickly get overwhelmed, but what one piece are we going to take away today and build from? So as we think about distance learning, we think about these 4 pieces: equity, access, maintenance, and student-centered. Equity really is founded in our beliefs and what we're presenting to students to learn. Do we believe all students can learn? How will they show us that? What do our live meets look like? Access is really our organization. How are they reaching the materials in our Google Classroom? Maintenance, that word didn't sit with me well at first, but it really, really makes sense. And this is where we're the glue that's holding it together, because that's our consistency. We think about socio-emotional learning and our kids, and we know they need consistency, and they thrive and succeed with consistency. And how are those systems in place? And then student-centeredness. Learning is a 2-way street. The best advice I ever got on how to run my classroom and the procedures and how assignments and feedback was given was when I asked kids what they needed. They know what they need to learn, and thinking about giving that voice and ownership within our classrooms. So how do we provide equitable access and set every kid up for success? When I look at the 3 pillars and I think about the classrooms I've been in, the backpack of success skills, I think, is growing exponentially right now. When I think about strengths, I think about going into a kindergarten classroom and those kids entering the meet as prepared and resilient learners using sign language their teacher that had only been teaching kindergarten 1 year has taught them so they can greet one another because they want to engage. I think about equity and the procedures and protocols we use to make sure every voice counts. Every voice not only counts, but it's honored. We honor thinking. And all of that rests on the community that we set up. So how do we provide that access? To think about access, I want to pause here a minute. Look at this picture, which seems to have nothing to do with our presentation. And how does it make you feel? So get your emotion, and I want you to type it in the chat, but don't hit enter. Now, when I say waterfall, you're going to hit enter, and we're going to see all the emotions that people feel when they look at this image of Home Depot. Okay, waterfall. I'm betting that I probably see feelings of excitement, overwhelmed, frustrated, happy, sad, scared, all of the things. Christmas, we're probably seeing all kinds of emotions here. And thinking about Home Depot, what if this were our teaching? What if it were our Google Classroom? So why is Home Depot a poor learning experience for our kids? Who's successful here? So when I think about who's successful with all of these resources that are overwhelming, it's students who are maybe our high flyers, then they can grab anything and find that quickly. But it's not necessarily all of our kids. Home Depot overwhelms me. And we think about all of these resources. They are seemingly organized. And I, for one, am guilty of always giving too many resources. And you'll probably find too many in this presentation, but we've tried to organize them well. So hopefully that parallel pedagogy comes through. But when we give them too much, some students shut down. So how do we know what's just enough? Really comes back to asking our kids again. So now let's think of how distance learning is like brick and mortar learning. Let's think about organizing our space. When we think of walls, we think of boundaries. So when is that consistent time for our meeting? Small group and large group. Those are our boundaries. When is that consistent time where students can come to you to get help? Maybe one-on-one. Our anchor charts are those collective learning experiences we have together as a class, and they're vital for our kids as support as they're doing their work. And so where does that support live in our Google Classroom? Our books are our resources, our manipulatives, our readings, are all of those tools. Where are those housed, and how can kids always access that readily? And I really think a lot about this personal space. Kids, we have to focus on what we can control. And I think of listening to Miss Badwan yesterday talking about, and she'll be on this afternoon at 1:30, but she was talking about what she can control in kids in their space. So she asks kids if they're in a good learning spot. She compliments kids when they're in a good learning spot. Miss Bynum, that's going to be on this afternoon with kindergartners, has an expectation for kids to bring things to their personal space. And she circles up like a shark when those kids are doing well and compliments each of those, to where she said her kindergartners are showing up with exactly what they need in their space to learn. We have a lot of teacher power, and we help create that learning space. So everything is driven by time. There are 4 pillars and 4 explicit areas which we have to plan for. When we think about synchronous teaching, all of these 4 really interact with one another. What have we assigned asynchronously? So our synchronous meet can be about student discourse and students talking about their thinking and what they believe and their procedures, so then we can provide that in-the-moment feedback. And that's that feedback loop that's consistent and specific. What if we plan to do culture and relationship building? How do we greet kids when they come in the meet each time? With a large group of kids, how do we ensure that we've greeted every child? So when you look at this is really a linear model. This is how my brain works. And it's not necessarily that we have to do this on Monday to go to Friday, but when we think of culture and community, how are we embedding that in a video message in our screencast for our kids? So it's embedded with content. How are we building a community where students positively encourage one another? How are we checking in on kids? So it might be that's how you start Monday, but what's important is we have that cadence and rhythm so students know what to expect. Then they thrive. When we think about the process for learning, we set goals for the week. We talk a lot about teacher clarity and knowing exactly what the learning goal is. And students monitor that goal, and we provide feedback all along that loop through the week and at the end of the week with their reflection. And then our academic piece. Where are the videos, the screencasts, the assignments? Where are our office hours for supports? And what assessments are given? And do we give families a snapshot of that at the beginning of the week so they know what the whole week's going to look like together? So here's a few more questions to think about to make our classroom accessible and equitable for every child. And the strategic planning guide digs a little deeper. As I look through this, it helps me plan and organize anything I do virtually. And so really it's all about not forgetting what we know is great teaching and learning, but building upon it, and we have to be even more explicit in this virtual world. This slide just has a few resources for you. Our learning management system is Google Classroom, and I'm so appreciative of our friends at Digital Innovation Team for narrowing down for kids, so there's a few tools that we use really well. The portals we use are right there, but don't forget, those are the ones we use in JCPS. Those are all approved. But don't forget about email and phone calls and positive postcards. Those are great ways to communicate and keep lines open. Guides and pathways are just different ways to deliver assignments, and there are several tools and strategies. This may look a little bit like Home Depot, but that's for those of you who want to dig a little deeper and look at these resources. Now there's a Padlet link there, and I think someone's going to drop that in the chat. If you could, just take a moment to reflect on that first question. How might we provide equitable access and set every kid up for success? And type one idea in that Padlet as I pass it to my friend Christy.
So our next focus is going to be on how do we create a sense of belonging in a positive NTI learning community. And I do know that it is difficult in an NTI atmosphere, but it can be done. And kind of like Andrea mentioned before, this could be easily a time to reset, to try some of these things again, to hopefully encourage engagement and a sense of belonging in our community. You can go to the next slide, Andrea. Here we go. Okay, so why is it important to create a sense of belonging and to build that positive classroom community? Relationships and connectedness are essential. Community both supports and accelerates learning. I know accelerating learning is something that has been in a lot of conversations lately. A sense of belonging and a sense of becoming, it creates our sense of being and who we are. Identity, agency, competency, and well-being are developed through community. And a caring community is the difference between surviving and thriving. And especially in these tough times, I know sometimes it feels like we are surviving. And so how can we change that for our students from surviving to thriving? On the right is an example of a Jamboard check-in. This is something simple that you could have at the very beginning of your slide deck, just to have kids check in really quick. How are you doing today? Good, okay, bad. Maybe you can't have a morning meeting or a class circle every day, but you could have a short check-in every day. I've also linked underneath there the Jamboard templates where I got that. But a big thing here I want to point out is that when you have these check-ins, take it a step further so that it's not necessarily just surface level. So here I can see, maybe I don't need to check in with all of my kids, but maybe especially those 3 kids under the bad. Maybe I need to do a quick check-in with them. Just ask them, how are you doing? Are you okay? Don't necessarily pry or push, but if they need space to talk, maybe, make that available to them. So once again, just make sure you're taking it a step further and also checking in with those kids so they know that you really care. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we build a trusting relationship to support students' sense of belonging and positive classroom community? So on the left are some things that I think when you consistently do these things, it starts to build a really positive classroom community, and students begin to feel a sense of belonging. So learn about their interests. A couple slides later, there'll be a student interview link, so you can interview students. You could, in this NTI world, you could set up little conferences where you ask kids questions about their interests, but you could also send them a Google form. What books do you like to read? Who do you like to hang out with at home? All kinds of things. Just what kind of TV shows do you watch? And then bring those things into your lessons. Bring those things into your units. Allow students to explore with that kind of stuff and acknowledge. I noticed that a lot of you all like this. So I thought this week we would read all about this topic. Protect the student's self-esteem. So this is a big one. I think this really comes to, making sure you're not calling students out. Like, we know that, especially in this NTI world, it can be tough. But when you start to call students out in front of their peers, it can damage relationships pretty quickly. So just trying your best to really, think of some other ways you might be able to reach that student without calling them out necessarily, in your Google Meet. Build goodwill on good days and practice grace. So, if a student's really grumpy, as I know we can all relate to at times, it's hard to build goodwill sometimes. If you're trying to force relationship building on a kid who is just having a horrible day and maybe they're mad at you, it's probably not going to be as effective. And practicing grace. So we all need a little grace right now. We all need a little forgiveness, especially in this virtual world. So just assume good intentions. Maybe assume that the reason the kid didn't show up at the meet was there was something going on. Not that they didn't want to. Maybe something bigger was going on. And I think when we provide each other grace, we practice grace with each other and with our students, and we, forgive students for those, maybe mistakes that were made. It allows them to realize that, they can come back from that, and that, we do still love them. Listening to students. So not just, hearing them, but actually listening what they have to say. If they tell you that today's meet was horrible and they scream it out loud, that stinks and nobody wants to hear that, but maybe consider that, maybe reflect on that. Think, oh my gosh, what could I have done differently maybe? Maybe even ask that student, what could make this a better experience? Be consistent and follow through with promises, both good and bad. I think it's very important that if you promise something like a reward, you follow through with it. And that if, the class has made a choice that you promised would result in something, I don't want to say a consequence, but to follow through with those things so that they know that what you say, you mean, whether it's a good promise or, a promise that they might not want to hear. But being consistent knows they know what to expect every time, and they know that what you say is what you mean. Be vulnerable and own mistakes. Especially in this NTI world, I feel like everybody has tech mistakes. All the time I'll be like, I'm so sorry. My computer's not working, my internet's not working. So I'm constantly not constantly apologizing, but constantly owning those mistakes, or constantly if I've messed something up, to let the kids know that I am vulnerable, that, things do happen to me too. And honestly, when you've practiced grace with them, they'll practice grace with you, and they'll be like, it's okay, it's okay, Miss Mudd, you'll get it tomorrow. And they also learn to start owning their mistakes and being vulnerable. Share your story and model self-reflection. Some people are more comfortable with sharing their story than others. I was always a person that I would let students know a lot about my childhood, a lot about, my school experiences. And sometimes because I would open up, kids felt connections and they could talk to me about certain things. And it built a relationship based on common experiences. Model self-reflection, reflecting on the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the great, reflecting on how you feel that day. I would also often, if I was having a bad day, I would reflect on that and let the students know. Be genuine, empathetic, and present. Kids can tell when you're being fake. So be genuine, just be yourself, because they definitely know when you're faking it. To the right is just a checklist, something you could use to kind of keep track of, did you call students by their name that day? Did you compliment them? Did you praise them? Did you interact with them? And just having that, you can even just make it a checklist, like just check off. And that way you kind of keeping track of who you're interacting with, because more than likely who you're interacting with is who you're building that relationship with. Here are just 3 strategies that if you want to use tomorrow, you could. Morning meeting, class circles, and banking time. Morning meeting and class circles I'd heard about a lot. They could be used at all grade levels, and so can banking time. But with banking time, I'd heard a little bit about it, but something that I read that really stuck out to me was that it's student driven. That the student, it's one-on-one with the student, but they get to talk about whatever they want. If they want to show you music they listen to, and tell you, hey, this is my favorite song, let's listen together. If they want to tell you all about the football game they watched last night, if they want to tell you whatever, that is their time. And you're supposed to listen and validate, their feelings. I know time is hard right now. So maybe 10 minutes before class or 10 minutes where you schedule. And also, you don't have to squeeze all the kids in 1 week. This could be something a month long, where you have all school days in a month, and you check off when you've met with each student. And just 10 minutes, just to build that one-on-one time. So yes, I know this can be a little overwhelming. So honestly, if you have taken a few things already and you know what you would like to try, you can ignore this. But if you're a person who, like me, you just want to dig and you want to keep digging and find more, here's just some articles and videos and materials that you can use to start building your positive classroom and sense of belonging. I especially enjoyed reading the John Spencer 5 Ways to Get to Know Your Students in a Virtual and Hybrid Environment. Also at the bottom right is the Padlet again. If you want to reflect on this goal and kind of talk about what are some things you could try tomorrow, and what are some things you're still wondering.
Okay, we have one more question in just a few moments. So how do we establish and sustain these routines? I love this mission statement on the right from Mr. Morrison's class at Medora. I love the fact that the kids are involved in the mission statement. We create these things with kids. They know, and we can guide them to develop these flourishing communities that accelerate learning. And you notice how the backpack of success skills is pulled out as well. And that is one thing I've definitely noticed flourishing with kids during this time. So how do we do that? On the right, you'll see from Miss Schwager's classroom, second grade classroom, an active listening. The kids developed with her what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like to help them learn. And this is what a quiet body looks like to help them learn so they're not distracted by their classmates. Not only that, she has a student each day that leads this in their meet. So they're reminded of those expectations, but it's like a miniature teacher there. So the students realize that Miss Schwager's not the only teacher in the classroom, but every child in the room is a teacher in that classroom. Then as you look on the left, that's another from another classroom. And I love how there's expectations and an agenda. Kids like to know what to expect and what's happening next. So if we don't have those things, the best time to do it is right now. Get feedback from kids. There's lots of ways we can do that. This slide I thought of when I entered the class meet from Miss Sanders at Foster Elementary. So what are kids doing when they enter the meet? In her classroom, the kids are learning sign language. They're learning good morning and good afternoon and greeting one another. So it doesn't look like chaos, but they're all engaged in greeting one another. In another classroom at Slaughter, Miss Loving, she plays music, fun music, and she literally is dancing. But then she has a writing prompt there to check in on her kids. So her kids have something to immediately do, but they're welcomed with fun. So what are kids doing? Then the lesson, what do students need? What do we need? Help. Where do they get that help? It's a little different in a virtual classroom. Can they just unmute? Do they use chat? There's so many issues. And participation, which tool are we using for participation? And again, I want to shout out our digital innovation team partners for limiting those tools, because as I talked to Mr. Stahl yesterday, he said sometimes one tool is a little better than the other, but I use the same one to be consistent because it allows more learning to happen because there's not that awkward time.
There are different people schedules because we talked about consistency. So when your schedule is consistent from week to week, kids know exactly and families know exactly where to be and when to be there. So on the left side, we just have an elementary teacher example. And a big thing there was that families actually had some voice in when their students, like which group they were in. So they chose what time worked best for them. And that's how they grouped the students in group 1, group 2, and group 3. It was based on the family's availability. On the right is a student high school example. So that student does have a red, white, and blue day. And the student has the schedule at home. So the student knows exactly where to be, when to be, and when to be there. And it's consistent. So there's no question about, where they're supposed to be at 8 a.m. on a red day. They know exactly where to go. And then in the middle is just a family schedule example that I found from a school district. But we wanted to put this there because it might be a good idea to, encourage your families to create their own family schedule at home with their kids. Having that, for that schedule on the left, so the family might put from 9:30 to 10:30 academic time, but then the rest of it they might go ahead and set up, okay, when am I going to work on my independent work? When am I going to eat lunch? When am I going to play outside? So encouraging families to kind of create that family schedule and that home schedule to build more, routine and consistencies at home also. So here's just more resources. Once again, if you're overwhelmed, you can just ignore this slide. But if you're looking for more, I definitely suggest The Best Ideas from the Distance Learning Playbook by Fisher and Fry. It's a podcast. It's only about, I think, 20 minutes long, but I listened to it and I really enjoyed some of the conversations that were happening. And then lastly, these are Better Lesson resources. They do have, when you click on one of these, it'll give you a lot of resources, everything you need to, successfully do one of these. So check those out if you're interested. Also on the left is our Padlet. So if you'd like to reflect one more time, and if you're not watching this live, We'll try to, we'll make sure that the presentation is linked. And so that way, if you want to reflect and kind of share ideas and see what ideas other people have, you can. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. There was so much in that presentation. It did not go into the Home Depot area, Andrea. So, but I love that analogy. It was perfect for. I know as a parent and teacher that it can get overwhelming, but we appreciate you all being on here, sharing all those resources. I love the idea of, asking students what they need and providing that consistency. And Christy, just reminding everybody about, that lots and lots of grace is still needed, even though we're all pros now of NTI. But it's still a good reminder, and just another shout out to all those teachers examples, especially Mr. Morrison and Medora. If you're not following him on Twitter, you're missing a lot. He's fantastic. So thank you both. Appreciate you all sharing. And up next at 9 o'clock, Andrea's going to stay with us, but we're also adding Sarah, Stacy, and Amy. Good morning, you all.
Good morning.
Glad you all are joining us. I know our next session is going to be about math-specific routines and expectations, so excited to hear about that. And I know our math teachers will be as well. So if you all are, before we get started, just a reminder for anybody who's watching live, we are always monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, just let us know and make sure you introduce yourself. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel.
Thanks,
Thank you. I think Andrea is going to share her screen so that we can see the slide deck, and we shared that so that you can get that on the digital learning channel, so that you can review the materials that we are sharing. We are your K-12 math team, and we have collaborated to provide some very specific examples for you to try within your classrooms for math lessons. So if we can go to the next slide. So we want to start with why building a mathematical community is so important. And the mathematical community in the title is linked so that you can have resources on the first 20 days, and it will provide lessons and resources for you to build your mathematical community as we continue through the school year, because it's so important to review and come back to that almost every day, and especially after breaks. So it's not going to happen over the course of just a few days. You have to be consistent and begin at the beginning of the year and spend time developing that community with your students. So you have to teach those procedures, establish those routines, and then revisit throughout the school year to remind students. And once you get in that habit and they know, then everything's going to go a lot more smoothly. I know when I was in the classroom, I would review them so often. They'd be like, we know. But then I knew that we had established our routines and our procedures, and we were able to move on much quicker throughout the lesson. And this is tied to the racial equity and the dimensions of equity. There's 3 dimensions of equity. You have your multicultural education, social justice education, and then culturally responsive teaching. And as you know, in mathematics, we are focused on the deeper learning stool. So we're balancing conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and application and problem solving. And so we wanted to show you how our deeper learning stool fits within those dimensions of equity, because we know that racial equity and providing culturally responsive teaching in a math classroom may look different, and it's a piece that everybody's asking about. So when we look at this stool, the conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, they are tied very tightly with the culturally responsive education, because we are building mathematicians.
Am I frozen or is Sarah?
I think it's Sarah, Andrea, that we've lost. So Since you and
Okay.
I are still talking, and I'm showing on the YouTube live that we have excellent connection. I think Sarah's dropped her internet. So
Oh no.
Okay. You want to pick up, Stacy?
Sure. So as Sarah was saying, she'll probably pop back on here in a moment. But within our work and our building with the the conceptual understanding and procedural fluency and how it ties to the culturally responsive teaching, we are building mathematicians. We want students to be able to see themselves as a mathematician in their everyday life. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're here doing some great research and they're doing all of this, but they're appreciating and recognizing where those skills and analytical thinking that have been developed to add curiosity has been woven into their educational experience through their culturally responsive teaching. Then as we move into the application of our mathematics, which is the move for us in our deeper learning stool, those connect to the multicultural education and the social justice education, where we're really celebrating the diversity of thinking that students bring to the table. What strategies or what thinking, what approaches, what do they already have in their individual toolbox that they can bring to the table and add to critical discussions, their perspectives, their plans on how they can approach a situation and a problem through their mathematical understanding as well. So, next slide. We are wanting to really kind of take that idea of racial equity and how does that tie into the math. And this is why our procedures, such as our routines, our beliefs, and how you're building that authentic engagement really happens. And what can we do in order to build that up? So how do our beliefs, routines, and procedures build that authentic engagement within our community?
So I want to piggyback off of what you said as we talk about how these routines and procedures and authentic engagement build that community, and seeing our students as mathematicians and helping them see the mathematician within themselves. And that starts at a really early age. So as we focus on numeracy, it's based on our beliefs. These are Joe Bowler's math norms that we've adopted in JCPS. And as you look at these 7, you'll find them linked in our elementary frameworks right at the top, because our kids need to see and know how successful they are as a mathematician. They need to know that mistakes are valuable and opportunities to learn. We actually grow synapses when we make mistakes and then persevere. So we're working with that. Questions are really important. In my math classroom, it wasn't always great. When I raised my hand and asked a question, sometimes I was shamed and told to put my hand down because I wasn't, quote unquote, listening. But listening with the kids, they come to us with different perspectives. So we know it's about creativity and making sense and building that intellective capacity that Zaretta Hammond talks about, and the ability to learn math. So you can hear that we're deeply passionate about this, and this is the foundation of our mathematics classrooms in JCPS. And I just want to give a shout out to several of our teachers. Miss Bronner, that's going to be on this afternoon, is going to talk about herself as a mathematician and how she weaves these within her classroom at Brent Frank. So as we think about intentional connections, so looking at the right is an interaction, like how are we keeping track? I've noticed myself, it's a much greater challenge in the virtual world than it was live, even with professional learning and when I go into classrooms. So I've gone in with teachers and collected data on their kids for them, because we used to be doing 1,000 things at once as teachers, and now it seems that we're doing 10,000 things at once in the virtual world. All right, I might be exaggerating a bit. But then you see on the right, so how are we monitoring that? We know what gets monitored, what gets done. We know what gets celebrated is what kids imitate. So how are we doing that? I think back to our presentation this morning when Christy talked about not calling kids out. Well, let's call out mistakes in a positive way as opportunities for learning. And then as I think about the power of yet, that word has huge implications. When kids get frustrated, and that happens, when I get frustrated, I remind myself, I might not be able to do that yet. When we add that word, they know we believe in them. And that little growth mindset card is actually a shout out that Miss Badwan gives in her classroom every week. And I can't wait for you to hear from this team of teachers, 1:30 today, about how they're building this in their classrooms. All right, and so we think about that, and here's one example of a number sense routine. On the left, you see an elementary, and those are all live links to procedures and routines that we're going to talk about. And at the top right, you see the middle and high school. We're truly this K-12 vision as we're building mathematicians in Jefferson County, because you're building the mathematicians in Jefferson County. And it's all based on research. And then there's NCTMs, like what are teachers and students doing when we're getting evidence of student thinking. When we focus on thinking more than the answer, then kids have an entry point. And so one of the routines that's a really quick win is which one doesn't belong. It's a quick win because there's multiple answers, so that our kids aren't afraid. We've lowered the stakes. It's okay to say anything, and they start to accept that it's about their thinking and not about rightness and wrongness. So there's the teacher moves. So if I were here with you, if we were live together in a smaller meet where I could interact, we'd be doing this. But on the virtual learning channel, this looked like the best format for us to handle it. So there is a website that's linked there, but the teacher moves are you review the protocol. So you ask kids, which one doesn't belong and why? And so you give them some think time, which is super awkward right now in the virtual world. But I have witnessed some teachers doing amazing things. They've used their phones. They've sat back. Teachers are like lean back and say, I know you know this. And like they're giving kids signals virtually with body language to give them that think time. Then we provide explicit instructions on how they're going to engage. Are they going to use hand signals? Do you have a jam where they're going to move something too? Is it going to be in the chat? Like they need to know how, and then we're consistent with that. And then we present the problem. So there's the problem, and we give that wait time. We ask for volunteers. After we can see, we ask kids to agree or disagree during the discussion. And then we repeat till we get all the answers. Now, what are the kids doing? Well, they're the ones doing all the heavy lifting. They're thinking, they're using appropriate signals, they're sharing what they believe, they're actively listening. And a great way to practice active listening is ask them to repeat back what someone else said, or if they agree or disagree and why and what's different. They're providing add-on thinking. That's our questions. Can you say one more sentence about that? Can you tell me how? How is your thinking like his thinking? And then we give them a moment to reflect. What a great opportunity to write in math, to have time to solidify their learning. So there's our norms one more time. So as we think about which one doesn't belong, which of these norms did you see? Or might you see? I dare say, maybe all of them. So those are how we know the routines and procedures that we do are helping build mathematicians and equity in our district.
And so as you're thinking about some of the routines that you have set up within your NTI structure, and as Andrea showed us with the which one doesn't belong, there are several important planning aspects that you need to keep in mind when you're deciding on how is your structure going to be set up, what are kids going to do, how are you going to ensure that they're engaging, but also building that classroom community. So there's trust in each other and trust in you. So within this, this list gives you some ideas that you would want to kind of create routines to support a positive math culture within your NTI setting. So warm up. As students enter the session, what are specific things that students are going to do during that first 5 to 10 minutes as students are logging on? You know, they may be logging on, having a little technical glitch. What is going to be their task or their indication? As mentioned, Andrea, I believe you mentioned it before in the last session, a teacher comes on and has taught the kids some sign language in the elementary world just so they can quietly communicate with each other as they're coming on while you're taking attendance. What might be some attendance structures as opposed to the traditional calling the kid's name and saying here or not? What are those routines that you're going to do with students pop on? Setting expectations for your Google Meet. When kids log on to your Google Meet, what are some things that they should do before? What are they going to do during? And what are they going to do after? Andrea, if you'll pop to the next slide, and I'd like to, I think it got taken out. Pop back then. There was slide expectations on, and we'll make sure it's shared in there. There they are with you. Some Google Meet expectations. This was created, I believe, by one of our middle school teachers, Sarah, who utilizes this when students are preparing for their live sessions in NTI. So here's some great things to think about when setting up your structure and expectations. As we move into the possible use of breakout rooms, clearly define what is the expectation within your breakout room. What are the instructions that students are going to do? I believe Andrea on the next slide shows a possible breakout room. Slide. It was after. It's okay, no big deal. But with the breakout rooms, what are the clear expectations? So if you're having students document thinking on a slide, what are the instructions for them to do, and how are you promoting and giving that information? That's okay. No big deal. Go back to where we were.
Okay.
Go to the slide right before that when we're looking at routines. No big deal. We've put a lot of extra resources in here so that you can have some time to look and think about what structures do I want within my classroom. And so the last little bit of routines we want you to think about are what are signals for readiness within the conversation, within your live session. I know right now, especially at the secondary level, there may be some struggle to get kids to turn on their video because like they just think about, do I want to show my face, things of that nature. How can we take the video and make it a purpose and provide it a reason for us to work with it? So you can use your video on off as just a readiness indicator in a specific period of time. Maybe you've given a task, and as Andrea mentioned, that wait time as an indicator that they're ready to move on, they could just flip their video on. And then once you're ready to move on with the lesson or move on with some of the conversation, they can then turn it back off. You can utilize some of these things that we're seeing as barriers for our benefit within our routines. With cameras on. So as you're coming in and kids are working together or engaging in a task, maybe giving them a visual thumbs up or utilizing index cards or some sort of indicator with a hand signal that 5, I need a few more minutes. Using chat protocols. What are specific reasons and structures that you can implement within the chat, not just for sharing answers, but sharing when they're ready to discuss the answers. Because again, we're wanting to elicit student thinking when building that. We're not 100% focused on the answer. We want to see what kids are thinking and how do I really provide signals that they're ready for us to move on and talk about that. And then the waterfall chat, having something loaded up in the chat, but not dropping it in or hitting enter until you hear the word waterfall. So then students can actually go back and read each other's, compare, and you can have discussions for those. And so Sarah, Andrea, anything you want to add as we move on?
Yeah, I can go over these next 2 slides because these are how students enter classrooms that we've been in. So Ms. Wong at Frost uses a slide like this every morning when students log on. So she greets them when they come in, and if they come in a little early, they can have a discussion of how their day went or their weekend. But then every morning they have the first 5 minutes so that everybody gets logged on. She has these expectations posted and what they need to do when they first log on. And then she has a timer so she knows that they won't go over that 5 minutes. And that allows them to get entered, ready, and so that they're ready to start the lesson for the day. And if you go to the next slide. Oh, timer started. So this is just a modification of a way to take attendance. This one has a form on there, and the form just asks for first name, last name, and what class period. And then I put the picture of the squirrels on here so you can see, but it's a social emotional check-in. So each day you can build this into your attendance form and start to continue to build that classroom community. And so this question is, what squirrel do you feel like today? And so students pick which squirrel they want, and then you can discuss that before you move on. It was really cute. I saw this in a classroom, and the squirrels that they chose and why they chose them, I was like, oh, I love this. And so there's a lot of different pictures like this that you can use to build that classroom community. And then if you want to go, that's the classroom expectations for just a Google Meet. Here's the breakout rooms. So on the next slide, she has the expectations. So you're going to do your job and do it well. Make sure your video is on and it's a distraction-free space. Unmute and participate. Have fun. Give respect, get respect. And you do have good ideas, so share them. And then on the next slide, she has roles for students. So in each breakout room, there's a questioner, timekeeper, reporter, material manager, and encourager. And so when students go into their breakout rooms, there's a slide for them to put who's which role. So then every student's engaged in contributing to the breakout room. And if you go on to the next slide, you'll see how she has that organized by group. So then she can either assign them the role, or they can decide once they're in their breakout room which role they should have. Okay.
And this is a secondary example of identifying a breakout room. So in the top right-hand corner, those are the clear expectations and questions that students would need to answer as a reminder. And so these will be cards that students will have to match, but then they would have to add a text box in order to answer those questions and collaborate in some of the same protocols that Sarah had mentioned for the middle school. But within these structures, there are clear purpose and clear procedures and routines that have been established with intentional planning beyond that. So next. And so we wanted to make sure that you take a moment as we kind of wrap up here in the last few minutes and remind you of some of our upcoming sessions. This afternoon, we have some great math teachers sharing about building a mathematical community this afternoon at 1:30. So we'd love to join you for that, for you to join us with that. And then reminding you over the next 2 Wednesdays that we have continued support about math specific. We have our general sessions, and then math again at 9 o'clock, and how we're applying each of those concepts and thoughts. So thank you for your time. Ladies, any additional comments?
I just want to add, thank you all for being here, and I really, really, really want to encourage everyone to tune in at 1:30. These 3 teachers, I mean, kindergarten, you all, I'm just going to say it out loud, you have the hardest job on earth right now. And so teaching kids that have never been in school virtually, and Miss Bynum has some amazing advice. Miss Bronner's a 3rd grade teacher, and she's got amazing advice too, and so does Miss Badwan. The ideas we're talking about, you're going to see real life student examples. And I need to add a couple different sessions to this slide, and I'll do that. That is on me, because as Stacy was talking about discourse and breakout rooms, I thought of Nate Stahl at Chansey, and he's going to be on live on December 9th at 2:30. So I'll add that, and we also have some feedback, authentic feedback on December 16th. So I'll add those 2 sessions as well. But thanks for y'all's time. Were there any questions, Jack?
No, just a lot of, support from you all. We have a strong presence this morning with the CDLI and Deeper Learning team. So they are supporting you all. And Danielle on my team was just talking about how much she loves this particular math group of educators, and we just really appreciate it. I am a social studies. Social studies is my background, so you all intimidate me as math teachers a little bit, but I love those math norms that you shared. They are fantastic, and I think universal honestly. You could replace math with social studies or English or whatever. They're just a good set of guiding principles, I think, for teachers. And the other big takeaway from me, being techie, was those, I was so appreciative that you all shared those expectations with the Google Meet and breakout rooms from, I can't remember what teacher, I know you said her name, but those are fantastic. I think that my team, we have like this Google Meet cheat sheet or whatever, one pager to help with everybody, and I think that needs to go on there. Those are gems, really. When teachers create those things, they're invaluable to others. So
absolutely, we have some great teachers that are out there really doing the best they can with the situation and have come up with a lot of creative ways that we are just trying to be the voice of that, because we know they're probably currently working and building their communities in their classroom with their kiddos right now. But we really want to highlight those teachers and those great things that are going on in our district right now.
Yeah, I totally agree, Stacy. And Sarah, I just have to give you a little bit of grief because it would not be a Google Meet or Hangout, whatever we're doing, without somebody losing the internet and or forgetting to share their screen. So much like a wedding, I'm glad that there was like a little mistake or glitch to make sure that it continued. So, but I appreciate you all just diving right back in. So sorry, Sarah.
Thank you.
Just had to,
Thanks, Jack.
You're welcome.
And I just want one more shout out to the teachers out there. All these ideas are built. We can read about them, but we're doing action research. So our teachers across JCPS are doing amazing things, not just in mathematics, but we're going to focus on mathematics.
That's exactly right. So appreciate all of you. Thanks for sharing. Like Andrea and everybody on the team said, be sure to join in this afternoon when we get those classroom teachers in. It's going to be valuable information. And speaking of which, I'm going to see if I can share this out so you all can kind of see the schedule for today. We got just 2 or 3 minutes before our next group appears. But coming up at 9:30, we're going to be talking about science, and then later on ELA and social studies and visual and performing arts. But after lunch at 12:30, that's when we start talking with our classroom teachers, and you can see the schedule today for December 2nd that afternoon with music and math community building, high school science routines, high school ELA workshop. So just a lot of great sessions today and for the next 2 weeks on Wednesday. So we're really excited to be doing this teacher showcase and best practices during NTI. So that is what is coming up. And I know up next we are going to have Lacey and Charlotte, and they're going to be it's going to be about, this next session is on science routines and expectations, and Lacey and Charlotte are going to be in the chat, and I am going to be playing a video. So let me see if I can find that and get that started. So just hang tight while I get their video, and we'll get that going.
Hello, JCPS Science Community, and welcome to our session on building a positive science classroom community, brought to you today by myself, Lacey Eccles, K-12 Science Lead, and my partner in crime, Charlotte Ivy, the K-12 Science Coach, and some special guests. So we know that creating a strong classroom culture is priority number 1 in education. And this year should not be any different. In fact, I'd argue that creating connections and a sense of belonging has never been more important. But how do we create this positive classroom culture when we can't even see our students face to face? It's going to take a mixture of adapting some of our old tried and true strategies and creating whole new practices and activities. Even though we are in a digital setting, we've still got to believe that rich science learning can occur. And that learning happens in classrooms where students are positioned as knowledge constructors and sense makers, and where us as teachers leverage those experiences of our students and ideas as the class works together to develop explanations for phenomena. But none of this can occur if we don't have a community of learners working together. So what does research say makes up a positive science classroom community? You know, scientists, we like to depend on our research. So what might that look like? Well, research says that positive classroom communities are respectful and make classrooms these safe places for sharing. They're equitable so that everyone's ideas and participation are valued. And they support this commitment to community and learning together. And then finally, they move science thinking forward as students work together to figure things out. So we can create a safe, structured space for students when we're consistent with our virtual classroom norms. Think about your first time teaching, or really any time you've switched schools or are new to any environment. It's hard to truly feel like part of a community until you learn how that school operates. What are its expectations? What are the daily routines? How do we collaborate? School, even virtual school, feels more like home with routines and norms in place that we understand and that magnify our learning and friendships. So this slide is an example of taking those 4 pillars from the previous slide of a science classroom community and translating them into actual classroom norms or we statements. But this all looks nice, but what do they actually look like in a virtual setting? What strategies might you use to ensure that the opportunities for these norms to become the fabric of your classroom? Well, we have a treat for you. Instead of Charlotte and I talking to you about different strategies that you might use, we've called in the experts. We have a panel of 5 fabulous teachers from all over our district here to talk to you about how they take those pillars and make them come to life in their classrooms. Think about the next 20 minutes as a low-budget, late-night science talk show, where our guests might not be starring in the next blockbuster, but they're doing a job that is even harder, engaging students virtually in awesome science.
All right, so as Lacey said, we're going to begin with our first pillar on being respectful in the classroom. So we know that building trust and creating a space of openness are hard to do in a virtual classroom, in this virtual setting. So what strategies, routines, procedures do you guys have in place to build trust with your students? Also, maybe with your students building trust with each other. And then maybe you might have a story or two that you might be able to share to illustrate this point. So Amanda, do you want to lead us off with that?
Yeah, sure. So I really believe in hooking them right from the start. As soon as they enter my live classroom, I like to have an engaging question for them to answer, but something that's fun and easy to answer. That way, right from the start, I feel like I'm promoting them to, or encouraging them to answer and to be comfortable answering in my classroom. And then when it gets to actual content, they're more open and willing to participate. So as soon as they come into my live classroom, I have a screen that I'm sharing with a fun Google slide. It usually has like a Bitmoji picture of me and a silly riddle or a random science trivia fact for them to just guess true or false. And a lot of times I'm surprised because naturally it allows for just like some silly discourse to happen in the chat between students. Or sometimes they'll even unmute and say a comment to each other about what somebody thought the answer was. So that's been kind of an added surprise as their teacher, just seeing that happen naturally. And I feel by doing that at the very start, they're more open and ready to engage during the rest.
So I want to say that it's like really, really important to start the tone off really, really positively. so my live classes start at noon. I always kind of just start it up a little bit earlier, about 5 minutes earlier. And I just tell them, like, as they enter the between 11:55 to 12:05 is basically their time to check in with each other. So as they're coming in, I always greet them, with their full name. Hey, how's it going? I'm so glad to see you, and then I always tell them that the chat, they should be checking in with their classmates because they don't see each other. I mean, it's really rough. And so I tell them, that chat is there for them to check in. As long as it's appropriate, I'm totally okay with it. It doesn't need to be content related. I just want them to check in with each other, see how they're all doing. And then I usually have some kind of goofy poll question up there too, just something to kind of keep them engaged and fun. And then I like to kind of bridge that positive start with a little bit of expectations, so reminding of expectations and classroom norms. But then I also like to do something called In the News, where basically I just pick something I think really interesting going on in the science world and talk about it. And the key there is to be super enthusiastic, because if you're enthusiastic, it's going to rub off on them too. And so I just talk about something going on in the news. And since science time scale is relative, it can be something from maybe a year or two ago. But as long as it's really interesting, kids seem to love it. And then I let them ask questions via the chat and I answer them. Or they can comment on it.
Wow, that sounds like some really engaging stuff that you're doing. I love the idea about using current science news to kind of build trust and engage students in what you're doing. So let's talk a little bit now about what kind of strategies, routines, and procedures you might be doing around participation and sharing in your virtual classroom. We know that in this virtual setting, that can be really difficult. So Megan, did you have something to say around that?
Sure. So in the elementary world, a lot of teachers might be familiar with using Class Dojo when we're in school. And that always helps with participation, getting kids to want to gain points. And I found that in the virtual world, it's helpful too. So kids will still be so excited for seeing their avatar and seeing how many points they're gaining and earning virtual rewards. So we're using virtual rewards, and that's really increased participation. Another thing we've been using is just continuing to use those total participation techniques of using whiteboards or having everyone answer in the chat, to making sure that everybody's kind of held accountable and needing to participate. And then recently, we also added a virtual bulletin board so kids can see other students' work, so they can see maybe why they didn't get the grade they thought they deserved and see some examples of exemplary writing, scientific writing and scientific arguments and things like that. So that's helped kids want to get on the bulletin board and see their name in lights.
Awesome. Caleb, did you have a little something you wanted to say about encouraging student participation?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And really, for me, also just sharing, getting students to share ideas. So I'm at the high school level, and so I guess sometimes envy some of like the elementary and middle school stuff. I know it's all different at different levels, but high school, it's like getting them to turn their camera on sometimes and stuff. And so, and I'm sure that's all the way down, but just establishing those expectations is one thing I've heard, and, like keeping it positive, Joseph, I love that. With, how do you get the kids to just be excited about science? I mean, it's tough. Like one of the things I've done with that is just kind of explaining like, hey, this is what, when we do this activity, it should look like. Like I should hear talking, like when we go into breakout rooms, I should hear talking when I go into breakout rooms. Like I shouldn't be like that last minute, like, teacher's here. Suddenly people are like, mic's on. But, just little stuff like that. We mentioned whiteboards as well. One of the things I've been doing to get students to share their ideas at the start of every unit cycle is using something called Jamboard. Jamboard. Everyone's been hearing about Jamboard. Probably sick of it, but I love it. I have been, what I'll do is I'll post a key question for that cycle instead of just saying, hey, now we're learning about bonding. One of the key questions we've had this week, for example, is what would life on other planets look like? Would it necessarily have the same kind of bonds and that our life on our planet has? Like, why is carbon so special? Being high school chemistry, sorry for the non-chemistry geeks in the room. But we always start just getting their ideas. And so I'm not going to start them with that question necessarily, but I would say, like, hey, let me hear your ideas about chemistry and life. Like, what do you know about life? What do you know about chemistry? How do you know, what do you know about those things? How do they come together? And I'll put them in breakout rooms and I'll let them kind of just splatter everything they know about those things on the Jamboard. And, I'm popping it into their rooms. I'm asking them some key questions, helping them kind of provide some structure with that. And then we go back to it at the end of our cycle and just look at their ideas again. Like, man, number one, look how much you've learned. Number two, let's try and add more structure again to this and fill in the gaps and add more details. And so I found some positive gains with that as well. And really just getting the students talking to each other. Man, something, you get 40 blank screens there looking at you. It's tough. So it's good. Making it a little smaller helps.
Yeah, those are, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You mentioned Jamboards, and it's funny, I used one of those today, and so very different because 4th grade, but beginning of a new unit and saying, what do you know about waves? We're working on energy and waves, and just, letting them put out what they know. And they're like talking about, the ocean, or just waving their hand, or just, very basic stuff. Yeah. And so then we can go back and visit that later. So that definitely, it's, if you've ever seen the templates that you can find online for the Jamboards, there's like a stop and sketch one or something like that. So there's boxes for every student so that they can insert their answer into their number or their box, and so that everybody can have a spot.
I think that's great. I love both of your ideas about how taking the Jamboard and using it in a variety of different ways, coming back and revisiting it and refining it. Those are really awesome. So let's go ahead and move to our next slide, which is on the equitable pillar. And so once again, this is really around that whole thing about participation and sharing, which we've already established is hard in the virtual classroom. But the question I want to ask now is, how do you encourage students that don't normally participate? And then maybe also a little bit on how do you monitor those kids that always want to participate, right? So you seem to have those two ends of the spectrum. So how do you kind of deal with those? So Joseph, what do you got for us?
So I'm a huge believer in circles. So circles where, when we're in the classroom, we sit in a circle and we can discuss things, whether it's content related or just a culture building activity. And it was really sad to think about this for a virtual classroom, but to be honest, it's gone really well for me. And so every synchronous session, in the very middle of our hour-long session, we do circle questions. And I design them so that every single student can answer. They can answer in the chat, or they can elect to answer with their microphone. I never make it mandatory for them to answer via the microphone because, to put this in perspective, I get usually 80 kids in my class in my virtual meeting. So, I can't call on every single student, but all of them can answer via the chat. And I usually start with something super, super just silly and simple. I do a lot of would you rather questions. For example, would you rather brush your teeth with hot sauce or ranch dressing or something stupid like that. And it's just a way to kind of engage them, and it kind of breaks the ice. A lot of kids are really, a lot of people in general are very uncomfortable sharing on a virtual setting. And I think as long as you break the ice with something super silly and simple like that, it helps. And then I usually scaffold it up kind of during that little brain break with our circle discussion. I tie in things either related to content or to things that they really want to talk about. So for example, we discussed the Breonna Taylor case using circle discussion questions. We discussed certain environmental justice problems in Louisville. And I really think that now is the time to really, really be there to allow students to share things. And they can do that by the chat, and they can do it by the microphone. The thing I'd say for the microphone is you have to set the expectation to say, if you would like to share, I have to call on you. And I tell them it's I'm basically unmuting you. I'm giving you a little pass to unmute yourself because obviously it could become chaotic if everyone calls on at once. So I tell them, if you want to answer with your microphone, you have to put in the chat, I would like to answer with my microphone. And then I'll call on them. And it goes pretty smoothly for 80 kids.
I'll say to piggyback on that too, the Google Meets now has the hand raise feature. I know Teams has had it for a long time. That's another great thing to do. And you've just, this is a magic brainstorm. But I'm going to try this. I like the circle idea. But in the classroom, I always heard you can have the students calling each other as well. So I don't know if you've tried like daisy chaining them, but that might be something that I'll want to try soon. So good idea. I love it.
Awesome. Andrea, did you have something you wanted to share on that one as well?
Yeah, so I know, Joseph, you talked about how you would have them comment in the chat to let you know that, they want to share. So one of the first things I did when I established routines is I went over this concept of one mic. And so my students know that they have to count in their head, they're silent, 1, 2, 3, and then unmute. And if someone starts talking before they do, they wait their turn and then they go. And honestly, I was really shocked that it went over well because this was kind of a first try thing, but it went over well. And anytime someone does start talking over, someone else in the class will say one mic. And so anytime we're helping each other build that classroom community and help each other out with, monitoring that time, my students actually receive Ubuntu points. Ubuntu is Kiswahili for humanity. And so even though in elementary school you use Class Dojo, I actually use it for my 7th graders too for their Ubuntu points. And so they can earn rewards such as end of the winter break, movie day, something like that, if their class earns enough Ubuntu points. Another thing I like to do is discussion boards. On Google Classroom, I let them pick an article of their choice from a reputable science website and they engage in discussions. And I really enjoy seeing some of my kids who don't want to unmute or even share in the chat actually do some good conversations off their articles that they chose. And Nearpod would be my other recommendation for those who may be struggling with overt responses. Nearpod allows students answers to be anonymous, which is a little bit better than chat because chat still has your name. So on Nearpod, you can share people's drawings, you can share their written responses without actually revealing who said that. And I think kids find that that's safe. And I think it's definitely an equitable strategy.
Let's move on to the next pillar, right? So that next pillar is the community pillar. And we've kind of dabbled on that a little bit throughout. It's really hard not for that to bleed into everything else, right? Especially in a science classroom setting where it's so important. And so back to talking about tools that we've had in brick and mortar settings and how to translate those into digital settings. How are we finding ways to translate what we did in brick and mortar about honoring all students' contributions, right, into this virtual setting where in Joseph's case, he has 80 kids in one classroom setting. So Amanda, what do you got for us about honoring all kids' contributions?
Right. When I was thinking about community, I don't want to keep talking about Nearpod, but honestly, Nearpod popped in my head when I was first thinking about community because, in the regular setting classroom, especially with our science discourse, we're just bouncing ideas and sharing, and the kids are hearing it firsthand. And that was hard to do virtually at first. But then one of the features I like on Nearpod is the collaboration board. And I generally have my screen sharing and presenting so the kids can see what other students are writing. A lot of times I will block out the names so they can't see who is writing what. But I think that helps build community because they can see each other's responses and what their peers are thinking on an idea, and then they can build on their own idea. And that also helps the students who might be sitting there lost at the moment and they don't know what to say. And that kind of just gives them a push in the right direction. Oh, I see so-and-so is writing this. Yeah, that sounds good. And so for me, that's the first thing I've got for building community. I really enjoy that during my live sessions. And then also sometimes I will click where I can see who is writing what, and then they can, hear me praising them like I would in the classroom. Oh, wow, that's a great idea, so-and-so. And I think that helps build that community virtually as well with them. Another thing I like to do is it's a Google extension called Mote. I don't know if you all have heard of that, but instead of writing and typing a message to the kids on their Google assignment, it allows you to record a 30-second voice response to them. And my students really enjoy that because sometimes they just get sick of reading everything, and then they can hear me in my own voice, telling them what they did well, or maybe something they need to even improve upon on their assignment. So I like that. It's honestly easier for me because I'm not typing a bunch. It's easier just to hit the record button and talk to them like you would in the classroom. And then lastly, one other thing I try to do every week, I don't try to do, I do it. Sometimes I'm a couple of weeks behind, and I tell the students that. But I like to mail them little gifts. It's very small and very inexpensive. And all I do is I buy like a 500 pack of silly stickers that they can put on their lab book or on their Chromebook if they own it. And a handwritten note from me to them.
Now, Amanda, do you always write a note to someone that's like excelling in class, or how do you pick who you write a note to every week or so?
No, yeah, not at all. In fact, it started off just writing notes and encouraging participation, but I do also like to take special note and writing notes to students who I know or who I can tell are kind of dropping off the radar and maybe not so engaged during that week, just to give them something to keep encouraging them, has been really good. So no, a lot of times I will choose some students who I think might need that extra push, might just need that extra, teacher hug almost.
The compassion part of education, right? Keeping your compassion still in that virtual setting, I think is awesome. That's a great idea.
And it's probably more rewarding for me, like I enjoy it probably more than they do. But
isn't that always the case with giving, right?
Fun. Yeah.
So that takes us to that final pillar, one that really can't exist without the other three, right? And that's moving our science thinking forward, what we're all here to do, right? And so as science teachers, my first thought when we were thinking, all right, we're moving remotely was, okay. So how are we going to get students to talk to each other? How are we going to get students to do science, to experience science, to solve problems, to analyze data, to engage in all those science and engineering practices, right? That we know are so important and really what makes our subject the best subject out of all subjects. And so, but this online setting had me, and still has me at moments, a little freaked out. And so how are we gonna get students to move their science thinking forward and collaborate with each other? And so, Joseph, what do you got for me on strategies that might help support some collaboration with each other so that we still have that important aspect in science?
Yeah, so I want to talk about breakout rooms, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess, because I've definitely tried them, and I'm sure many other teachers have experienced it did not go very well. But I learned from it, and that's really important. So I learned that when you do breakout rooms, first of all, kids love them as long as they're structured. I always do like a feedback thing about what can make our class better. And so many kids said, I love the breakout rooms. I love breakout rooms. So they do love it. They just have to be structured. So for example, when I did a breakout room where it was just like a basic discussion question, I was like, hey, talk about this. I would pop in to those breakout rooms and it was like, oh, okay, crickets. That's all right. I'll change that for next time. So next time, I made sure to give them a task in their groups. So for example, we're really diving deep into CERs, claim evidence reasoning, writing assignments. And first I kind of walked through, what a CER looks like. And with direct instruction, I taught it using Among Us, actually, the game Among Us, which is which was fun, and a bit of a stretch. But and then during the breakout rooms, basically I provided them with a document, a view-only document that just had 3 examples of CERs. And then I gave them also another view-only document, which is the rubric that I use for grading the CERs. And I basically told them, you have to come up, with your group, come up with a grade that you'd give them based on the rubric. And they loved it. I mean, they loved playing the teacher. And I think they understood how to use the rubric. They had a lot of different discussion points. I know a lot of teachers think differently about this, but I set up my breakout room expectations saying that you do not need to turn on your camera, and that I'd prefer you use your microphone. But if you really can't, you need to chat. Everyone needs to talk, but you need to, and you can do that wherever way you wish. But and I think I got great engagement with it, and they liked it. So they just need to have a task to do. They need to talk with each other about it, and they'll love it. Breakout rooms are fun.
And also some breakout room tips and tricks and strategies that can promote collaboration.
I'll chime in here. So a couple of different things that I do. The first one is, like Joseph, when I established CER with them in the class, I gave them discussion sentence stems. And so I literally would project on the screen the talk moves that was on the science website. So shout out to the coaches and Lacey. Yes, thank you. And I literally projected on the screen, and I first gave them a silly question that said I made this claim, all middle schoolers deserve recess. And they got into like a heated topic, but as they were talking, I required them to have to use those sentence stems before they shared out. And they really, eventually, it stopped being me telling people to talk, and eventually the kids started going back and forth with each other, which is amazing because I didn't even get that in the classroom last year, in a physical classroom. So it was awesome to see that happen. The other thing is when I establish roles in the breakout room, I clearly list them on my presentation slide, and I say, if you are the facilitator, this is your role. I literally give them names. The kids really enjoy having those leadership task. And so when you give them that leadership opportunity, it keeps them focused, and they know, okay, Miss Wynn, if she hops in here, is going to be looking for me to be the screen share, typing, or me making sure I'm keeping track of time. So I think that helps with the breakout rooms. Not makes them foolproof, but it does help with engagement.
Thanks for those final comments on that. My gosh, you guys are incredible. I just want to thank you guys for being such wonderful guests for us. I know that our teachers are going to really appreciate hearing from you all. So we just wanted to end really quickly, going back to our we statements and those 4 community building pillars that we talked about. So you can see that again on the screen. And once again, I think our teachers did an awesome job of bringing these to life, right? So you can look at these posted up there, but they gave you all kinds of strategies and looks into their classrooms, all the way from, K-12. And so that was really incredible to be able to do that. So what we want to end with is there's no secret ingredient to building a virtual community classroom. Every teacher has different approaches. They have their own personalities and their learning styles. But we had a lot of really wonderful thoughts shared today with our colleagues, and we hope these will help get you started. Thank you for being with us.
Well, all right. That was a really great session. I really appreciate the feedback and hearing directly from those teachers in the science classroom. And shout out to Lacey and her awesome efforts to put together that video. So way to go, Lacey. We appreciate you and the team, the science team there. Up next, we have our panel who is going to be talking about ELA specific routines and expectations. And Dominique, Suzanne, Jenny, and Sandra are all going to be here. Good morning, you all. Hey, Jenny, you're on mute.
world's famous words right now.
That's right. So one of these days, Jenny, we won't have to say that anymore. So.
Right. Today you're going to have me. We'll have some of my colleagues in the chat, and we're going to have a couple of teachers. I need to share my screen.
Yeah, and Jenny, don't forget, just a little, I know you're a pro, but don't forget about those closed captionings for us.
Yes, so let me get my screen up here.
Looking good.
Okay, and see, do I put it on present mode before I do captions? Okay.
If you hide that, you should see your captions. There they
Got
are.
it.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, you all. We're excited.
All right. So now all I see is my screen, but I want to make sure our guests are here, and I think I saw them. Lakeisha and Stephanie.
Yep. I see
and
them.
Sarah.
I see Lakeisha, Sarah, and Stephanie.
Fantastic. All right. So whenever you are ready, I think we are ready.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Go ahead, Jenny.
All right, so I want to welcome everyone here today. We are going to talk about building community in the ELA classroom. Whether you're elementary, middle, or high, this session is for you. We really want to focus in on building that positive classroom community, especially during NTI. We know that it's more difficult now to do, but we've got some teachers in the district who are doing it and doing a great job of that. So I want to go ahead and get us started on the general stuff, because what we really want to hear from is our teacher panel. So in the ELA classroom, we really have 4 community building pillars. You can see them there. Trust and openness. We want our students to trust you and each other in order to engage. We know that in the ELA classroom, we talk about a lot of different topics and subjects, and sometimes we ask students to sort of reveal themselves or speak their minds, and we want that to be a safe place where they can trust you and each other. We want, because of those same reasons, we want a respectful and equitable environment where they feel safe and contributing members of that learning community that you build within your classroom. Rituals and routines make it a helpful learning space. It's more welcoming when things are familiar and predictable. They know what to expect within your virtual classroom. And we also want to honor those multiple ways for students to participate and learn within the classroom. We know that just having students visit with us where we talk at them the whole time is not really an engaging way for them to learn. So we want to think about different ways that we can engage them. So doing this work is going to take a mixture of adapting those old tried and true strategies that we used in our classroom that we knew worked into this digital strategy. So we're sometimes creating some new practices and activities to engage students. So part of that is creating some classroom norms. So I'm not going to read this entire slide to you, but you can see there on the left are those 4 pillars. And then on the right, we have created some we statements for students. This is a way to translating them into what students can do within the classroom to create that inviting, welcoming space. So we trust, if you think of trust and openness, we trust each other, we provide support and encouragement, we give time to think, we may critique the ideas but not the people. So these are some norms as a teacher that you might choose to use within your classroom to create that community. So you will have access to the slide deck, and you can go back and revisit this. In ways that you can create those norms or add to what you've already created within your classroom. I want to go ahead now and get to our panel because we only have 30 minutes and I really want for you to hear from them. They're the experts. I'm super excited to offer this different PD format rather than being the traditional where Jenny Averly talks to you through some slide decks. You're actually going to hear from teachers today. So think of this next 20 minutes as this low budget yet YouTube worthy talk show where our guests might not be in the next blockbuster, but they are doing a job that's even harder. They're engaging students virtually in awesome language arts instruction within their classroom. So let me introduce our guests. We have Stephanie Bibb, who is a kindergarten teacher from John F. Kennedy Montessori Elementary. We have Lakeisha Turner, who is a first grade teacher from Mill Creek Elementary, and Sarah Butrid, who is a 9th grade teacher from Shawnee High School. I want to also let you know that we did have a middle school teacher scheduled to be here with us today, but unfortunately she was unable to be with us. So I just wanted you to know that we did have middle school representation, but life happens. And so we just, we still can move forward with the folks that we have because I know they're going to do a great job. So within our panel, we're just going to spend about 5 minutes focusing on each of our 4 pillars, and I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to talk about how they build classroom community within these pillars. So I'm just going to ask some questions, and I'm going to let you guys jump in and share for a couple of minutes on how you do this. So with pillar 1, we know that building trust and creating this space of openness are really hard to do in a virtual classroom, especially when all you're doing is seeing these little circles. A colleague of mine calls them M&Ms on the screen. So as you think about this, I would like for each of you to share what are some strategies or routines or procedures that you have in place to build trust with your students and your students with each other. Are there any great ideas or student stories that you have to illustrate your point? What does that look like for you in the classroom? Stephanie, we'll start with you since you are our kindergarten teacher. My goodness. And these are students that are in school for the first time and you've never even met them. Talk a little bit about how you address this pillar with those little kindergartners that you've never seen in person.
Right, exactly. Kindergarten is scary enough in our normal without a pandemic. So virtually, it's even more intimidating to our little ones. And sometimes it doesn't even feel like they're actually going to school because they're still at home and they're just in front of a computer. So it was really important to me from the get-go, from the first day, to make sure that I was building a strong relationship with them. One of the things that we did as a class during the first week, if we were in the building, we were in the classroom, we would be setting up our room norms and our rules. Well, with my little ones, instead of using the word rules, I like to use the word promises. So what we did is we created promises because that is a word that really sticks to their heart. They like to keep their promises and their pinky promises. So we created promises that we would make to ourselves and to each other as a class when it came to our learning and being respectful to each other. I want to make sure that they knew that me being their teacher, that I valued their education, but I also cared about their social and emotional needs. So I connected with them, with their parents. Sometimes I would do a one-on-one Google Meet even before school started just to get to know them so they wouldn't be as nervous. Of course, we did a drive-by where I was able to see some of them and interact with them that way when they were picking up supplies. During our meetings, I want to make sure that they know that I'm welcoming their opinions. It's not just my classroom, it's our classroom. So I didn't want them to think it was just Miss Bibb just pouring out all this knowledge and they didn't feel comfortable enough to actually open up with their opinions or their thoughts or even their questions, because when you're a little kindergarten, sometimes you're scared to ask questions. So one thing that I wanted to do, because there were some students who were unable to meet me in the mornings, I created a family fun night. So every Thursday night from 6 to 6:30, we meet together. Now it's optional, it's not mandatory, but it helps build our community. And we do some fun things, we do some educational things, and it also helps gets the parent involved. One day, just recently, I had a parent who, bless her heart, she was at work, so she couldn't join in the meeting normally, but what she did was she had her cell phone on. Her child was in the meeting, she was at work, she propped her phone up, you see her with her goggles on, her work gloves on, and we were doing like a little dance contest. She walked by, she danced a little bit, and she keep going to work, but she was really engaged and involved. And building that trust with families helps my students build trust with me, because it's not just the student right now virtually, it's the whole family that I am engaging and involving with.
I love that. That idea of engaging the family and building that trust there, and creating experiences outside of the classroom setting that is fun to get to know one another. I know there are some high school teachers that are doing something called a lunch bunch, where they invite students in and they just hang out and talk with students and build that trust and relationship to get to know one another. Great idea for ways to get families involved. Thank you. Let's move on to Lakeisha. How can you build on that? What are some things that you do within your classroom to encourage participation and openness and trust?
Hello and good morning. And I echo everything that Ms. Bibb just said. That's wonderful. But I also, we also had like a back to school drive-by where students can come and pick up materials. And for those students that were unable to because of, parent work commitments or they were at daycare, I did work with families to set up like a drive-by where I would drive up and be in the driveway or outside of the home, and the student would look out the window and wave like, "Oh my gosh, there's Miss Turner." So just to kind of give that face-to-face so that the first time they're not seeing me is not through a screen. It's, even if it's through a window, but it's more personal that way. In our virtual classroom, every day to build up that esteem, that relationship, that trust, we do a daily affirmation. And they repeat Miss Turner, and then they say it, and then we call on a few of our friends to say it out loud, and then they challenge each other. Say it like you mean it. Say it like you mean it. And so it is so much fun. We do, whenever anyone shares out in our classroom, we show love. We raise the roof. We give spirit fingers. We give them a round of applause. Even if they're just sharing out something that they did over the weekend, they're answering a question, we want to show them some love because we know it's difficult in this virtual realm. Also, just like Ms. Bibb said, as far as establishing relationships with parents, a lot of our babies are not super tech savvy, so they are learning right along with their parents as well. And so we want to engage the parents and make sure that they're involved as well. So I do hold opportunities for just chats with parents and questions that you may have, any additional resources that you may need. Is there anything that we can do to make this experience just a little bit better for you? And speaking of lunch bunch, we have what's called a breakfast bunch. And so every Friday morning at 10 o'clock, you bring your breakfast to the screen. We talk, we have affirming Fridays. And so we just spend that time together. There's no schoolwork during our breakfast bunch. It's just a time to come together, to fellowship and enjoy breakfast together.
Great. I love that. Again, the trend of involving families and creating opportunities for kids to spend time together outside of the classroom setting, just getting to know one another. Thank you. And now we're going to move to Sarah, who is our high school perspective, although I can certainly see how those elementary school strategies can work in any grade level. And I think that we'll see the same thing with what Sarah has to share for high school.
Hi, everyone. And yes, I strongly agree with everything that I heard. And a lot of those things are also strategies that I use. When I was thinking about trust and openness, for me, it's like, it's two things, because one is the teacher in the room. We set the tone for the relationships that we want to have with students, and so if we want to have open and trusting relationships, we need to walk in with that. And again, I teach freshmen. So this year on NTI with students, and these students, are coming from different middle schools. So they didn't know our school or one another. And I found we spend so much time checking in, and it's totally worthwhile. And be those morning conversations or regular like Google form check-ins to find out, how they're feeling about their academics, how they're doing just socially and emotionally, to find out things that they like. I post one of those like every other week. But I think that that's helped a lot. And then implementing those things. And so showing them that like their voices do matter in the classroom and that we're using it. Oh goodness. One thing I wanted to share was, so yesterday I have office hours as well. So we have office hours on Wednesdays as a school, and I also have them on Tuesdays in the afternoon because I felt like they needed some afternoon time. And I had 3 students who were in, and one student, I had accidentally hurt her feelings in class because I had left her out of a conversation that she needed to be in. And so I apologized to her, and I explained that, I can be a bit of a hummingbird and then forgetful. And then the 2 other students who were in there jumped in to like help the situation. And they were like, yeah, she forgot me before, don't worry about it. And the other one was like, yeah, she even forgets to turn her mic on sometimes. And I just laughed, like it felt so good because it was that, we'd achieved that family environment where, they wanted to jump in and help, and they trusted that I hadn't meant to hurt this student. So it really, it's repetitive, right? Build relationships, focus on relationships, but there really is the foundation for these things to flow forth, I think.
Excellent examples. Thank you. And that's a great segue into our second pillar, where we want to build respectful and equitable classrooms where everybody feels safe and contributing members of that learning community. Let's start with Lakeisha on this one. Lakeisha, can you share some examples of how maybe a specific strategy that has worked for your students in creating a respectful and equitable environment? And is that a strategy that you use all the time? Do you change it up? What does that look like in your classroom?
Well, in the classroom, if we were actually together in the classroom, we would have what's called one mic. And so that would be an opportunity for students to speak, and everyone, their eyes follow that person, their ears listening to that person, so that that person can share out and share their feelings, share their questions or their answers. In a virtual world, it's a little bit different. And so we do what's called eyes and tracking. And so that means you can't turn around, you're not looking to the side, you're not watching TV, your eyes are tracking, your eyes are looking at the person that's speaking. And so at that point, like our hands are up, everyone is listening because we want the person who has the floor to know what you say matters. Everyone has a voice. We want you to use it. But in this virtual realm, even though we're not together, I'm still listening to you. I still hear you. I want to hear what you want to say, and I respect what you're saying. So again, we're eyes tracking. That means our eyes are on you, our ears are listening, and everyone is wanting to hear what you have to say.
Lakeisha, I love that. I work in high school world, and I know that it's a struggle to get high school students to turn their cameras on. So we often don't know at the high school level, are our students respectful? Are we paying attention? Are we listening? So that's a great strategy. And to add that it's showing respect for one another is something that I think a lot of our high school teachers can learn from and try to do with our students. Thank you. Since I just talked about high school, I'm going to move on up to Sarah for this one. What are some strategies that you use, maybe a student story, around creating a respectful and equitable learning environment where all kids feel safe and as members of your classroom?
Well, I think that, like, most importantly, I need to show respect in order to expect that from our students. And I'm very open about my feelings and kind of what my non-negotiables are and what I'm sensitive to. And I think that that helps set a good stage. Also, I think as a teacher, you do need to reflect on like what kind of relationship you want with your students. And that includes a reflection on hierarchy and positionality and authority. And I think that is a shift that we see as our students get older. A lot of times we might, as a teacher, take a more authoritarian stance. But then we still want students to be as trusting, as engaged, as respectful to us, even though we've kind of taken that away. So I think that's important to keep in mind. With NTI, it's been very interesting because I feel like it should have been more of a struggle, and yet I've had a lot of successes. So I'll share this. And speaking of cameras, for example, that was something that like I would sometimes get frustrated because I felt like I wasn't being respected. And I shared that with them, and so we came up with Flash Cam. And so, you know, throughout the lesson, I shout out Flash Cam, and people either flash their camera or say something over the mic, or they put something in the chat, or they raise their little hand. It doesn't matter. The little hand in Google Meet, I mean. But then that lets me know that people are there. I feel respected, and I feel like that's worked really well for us.
I love that. So we've gotten a couple of very different strategies that are working for teachers and students to create respect. I want to jump down now to Stephanie, who has our sweet little kindergartners, and hear about how you create opportunities for a respectful environment there.
Yes, ma'am. Now, when it comes to my classroom, my students, with them being so young and it can seem so intimidating to speak up and speak out, I make sure that we encourage each other. We cheer each other on. We have a habit of giving each other compliments on our thinking. We kiss our brains. We have hand signals when someone is answering. And even when they make a mistake, we still celebrate the mistakes because I'm teaching them that, you know what, mistakes are part of the process of learning. So mistakes are not a bad thing. So I don't want them to be shy or to decide that, oh no, I don't want to answer anything because it might be wrong. And we're also teaching them to the wait time. Now the wait time has been a little bit of a struggle when it comes to virtually because it's different in the classroom. You know, I have to wait for my babies to mute and unmute, and then sometimes, you know, they got all these kids just looking at them on the screen and it can be intimidating. So being mindful of that wait time and respectful of, okay, even though it's your turn, it's okay. You have enough time to process, to think, and then go ahead and give us an answer. One thing that we do is we have it kind of like Lakeisha said, an affirming word each day. And like right now, our word for this week, because we're going into the holidays and celebrations, our word, now it might sound big because our kindergartners are small, but we choose big words for big minds to do big things. And our big word this week is unprejudice. So we're talking about what unprejudice means and how you have to be open-minded to different things, and that each one of us, we have to respect our differences, and even not just culturally, but our learning differences. It might take another kid a little bit longer than you, and we're not going to rush them. We're going to be respectful. We're going to be equitable. And one of our promises that we made, like I spoke of in the beginning of the year, is we promised not to steal someone else's learning. So even though a student might know the answer, they know to be respectful and to wait and not to unmute real quick and yell at the answer, because we are being respectful and allowing that student an opportunity to learn.
I love that. Again, another great strategy with that word, kind of word of the week. And how to get kids to engage with one another and create that environment. Thank you. We're going to move on now. I'm looking at the time, and it is ticking away. To how do you create a familiar and predictable classroom in NTI? Anyone who knows me knows I am a huge fan of rituals and routines in the English classroom so that students come in and know what to expect. I hated when kids came into my classroom and they'd be like, are we doing anything today? Or what are we going to do today? That really wasn't the case for me because I had these rituals and routines within my classroom. So how do you create this cadence of learning for students during NTI? Are there specific strategies or routines that are really successful in your classroom to make this an environment where kids are ready to learn and building community? Let's start with Sarah on this one.
So one thing I shifted away from with starting class is, instead of doing an opener, we have like a few minutes of chat time every day. And I think I'm glad I did that because now everyone is much more involved in discussion. And so that's something they know that when they come to class for NTI, we're just going to be checking in and seeing how everybody's doing for the first few minutes. And they're welcome to just have chats in the chat box. And it's been interesting to think how to curate rituals and routines in a virtual space. And so I wouldn't have included how I designed assignments before, but like I find that I'm making sure I'm much more repetitive with the style of graphic organizer, for example. I want students to find comfort in the tools that we're using. And I think that's true of what we're using, like digital tools. I've really tried to keep the number low so that there are things we're using regularly and students can become comfortable with those as well. Also, we have our writer's notebooks, and that is something that they can rely on weekly. And then again, what I had mentioned before, we do a lot of check-ins regularly. And yeah, I think I'll finish there.
Okay, good. I love that. They're writing on a regular basis. You're checking in with them so that they know that you're helping keep up with where they are and what they're doing and providing that support for them. Lakeisha, what does that look like in your classroom?
Well, we start the day. Everyone who knows Ms. Turner knows that I love music. And so a lot of our day is spent with music, from our transitions in the classroom to transitioning virtually to music. And so I'll have normally I'll have like 2 songs that play within our 5-minute countdown until the day is ready to get started. So as they're logging in, there's music. Ms. Turner I have my camera on, I'm dancing, we're boogieing, we're having a good time, ready for our day. And so I use a slide deck every day. And they know, okay, once the welcome, we have a morning message, we have our class mission statement that we created together, our positive affirmation. They know that every day is assigned a day. So every day of synchronous learning, we have a theme for that day. So we have Math Monday, we have Share the Text Tuesday, where they have a shared reading. On Thursdays is Get Lit Thursday for an interactive read aloud. So they know on that day what's going on. And so before, where I've had to, like, I'll post it with a hashtag of what we have going on. There was one day that I put the wrong thing. It's Ms. Turner, today's Tuesday, it's Share the Text Tuesday. You still have Math Monday up there. And so they know what day it is and what to expect. And so just having that normalcy, if we were in the classroom, I would want the classroom to kind of run and function as if I wasn't there, that I'm really just facilitating their learning. But in the virtual world, it can still happen. They know, again, the expectation and what's going on as far as our synchronous learning for each of those days and what the theme is for each of those days.
Great, thank you. And for the sake of time, we're going to move on to our 4th pillar, multiple ways to participate and learn. And since we've got about 3 minutes left, I'm going to ask each of you to just give us a quick, less than 1 minute response to ways that you engage students in multiple ways in reading and writing and speaking and listening. So we'll go ahead and start with Stephanie on this one.
Okay, I'll try to talk as fast as I can. No, you're fine. One thing for kindergartners with learning sentences, we do something called superhero swag. So I delivered little cakes and masks for them, and we participated, we worked together, and we learned superhero swag. We came up with sentences. They took turns. They collaborated. Another thing we did a favorite family food, where we did a Google slide deck, and each student had their own slide, and they contributed, collaborated with it. We created a book for the classroom. And then we also do like a round table storytelling, where Ms. Bibb will start the story, and then each student takes a turn, and we work together to complete a story. It comes back to me, and then we end, and then we have our story.
Wow, that was awesome and quick and beautiful. Great ideas. How about you, Lakeisha?
In our virtual world, we collab on like Jamboard. We use the chat feature on Meet. I also do what's called feedback surveys for both our students and our parents, because I want our students to give us some feedback. What did you think about that? We just finished our first project-based learning. We did animal habitats, and so doing that virtually, very different from doing that in the classroom. And so we wanted to make sure that it was equitable as far as having the materials and the items that they would need to complete. So again, having students give us feedback, but also having parents give us feedback, and also self-assessments, because one thing that I want is, what do you think? How do you think you did? Let's collab and let's talk together about ways that we can move forward as far as your learning. So we always want to make sure we're getting feedback from students and parents and allowing them to self-assess their learning.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, what's your response to our speed round?
Well, I would say that I use Google Meets, and I really make use of the polls and the chat box a lot, and even the little hand raise function, because you can still get through a lot, even if students are too shy to speak. I love Jamboard. It's definitely the most used tool. We've been going back and forth with breakout rooms. I found that office hours have also been really great and just allow me to differentiate and give students more flexibility or time with assignments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank everybody who joined us today, and a big special thank you to our panel. You all were amazing and gave us some great strategies and ways that you actually do the work in your classroom to build community. So we appreciate you and sharing your expertise. And for those of you who tuned in, hopefully you got some great strategies for building community in your ELA classroom.
Yes, thank you very much to the panel, Sarah and Lakeisha and Stephanie. That was fantastic. You all have a new fan, if you don't know that. Dr. Coleman was on the chat just really saying how much he appreciated specifically how you all were making time to build a sense of community in your classrooms, and just reiterating an important fact that we all need to remember, that that you can do this in the virtual setting, and you guys are proof of that. So Dr. Coleman loves what you all are doing. So glad you all could join us, and thank you for your insights. So appreciate all of you. We are going to be moving on. Thanks, Lakeisha, Sarah, Stephanie. Also would be remiss if I didn't say that those are Zone Wonderful schools with Mill Creek and JFK. Sorry, Sarah, but the Zone 1 is the zone that I specifically look out for. So sorry about that, but you got your own caretaker over there with the high school with Matt Bolka and Danielle Washburn. But appreciate you all being on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So up next, we are going to be looking at social studies specific routines and expectations, and I'm going to try to find the video because Ryan New and Rebecca and Vincent are going to be in the chat helping answer questions. So I will be back here in just a second when I find this video, and we'll hear from them.
Hi, my name is Ryan New. I'm the instructional lead for Jefferson County Public School. Today we're going to be looking at the question, how do I engage students by engaging and supporting questions? What do questions do in the inquiry process? For us, there are two different types of questions, compelling and supporting. Compelling questions, as you'll remember, are intellectually rigorous and student-friendly, argumentative. They frame units and are oftentimes motivational. Supporting questions are much more specific to disciplinary standards. They're more grounded in the knowns within a discipline, and therefore oftentimes frame lessons so they can become the means to scaffold knowledge over time in order for students to be able to answer the compelling questions. So how do you bring attention to the compelling and supporting question? For us, questions are not ornamental. but are the intellectual drivers of inquiry that ultimately lead students to argument and action. Therefore, there must be time set aside for us to really get into the language and the meaning of those questions. When it comes to compelling questions, we often talk about staging a compelling question. This is done at the very beginning of the unit. So you'll want to create some civic space in order to discuss the question's language and dispositions, to connect it to the lived experiences of the students, and to spark curiosity while building context for the unit. Remember that if a compelling question is for the entire unit, we really need to ground in that question because that's going to be tying together the next several days of learning. Each of those days then are going to be represented by a supporting question. So we talk about engaging the supporting question at the beginning of the class. Therefore, civic space must be provided to focus students on the importance of questions, to focus students in the mindset and to ready them for the sources and tasks that are coming, and ultimately also to spark curiosity for the lesson. Today we'll be spending much more time on looking at supporting questions. Here's a quick look at where the supporting questions are reflected most often in IQ2 as its own germane space. For looking at how we think about inquiry and the process, we always begin with questions, and just as they're in the standards, we're looking at identifying, developing, and generating supporting questions. Now, students will generate, identify, and develop questions, as will teachers, right? How do supporting questions standards scaffold? As you'll see here, supporting questions are germane to the questioning standard that begins every single inquiry. For us, all these are IQ2. You'll notice identify, develop, generate, and so on. That's very important both for teacher and student to do. Teachers might create a supporting question to drive the lesson. That doesn't mean that other students aren't creating supporting questions during that lesson. What might inquiry look like in a typical class? We've gone through this prior, but the idea is that at the beginning of the class, you're going to be engaging the question. In the middle of the class, now that the question is sort of set the focus and direction, students will engage sources through discussion. Why? So that at the end of the lesson, students will be able to communicate conclusions using those sources to help answer the question. So how might you begin a lesson? Well, engaging supporting questions inside of a lesson typically take around 5 to 8 minutes. Why is this so important? Well, engaging questions legitimizes the question for students. It means that we're going to be pausing for a moment to look at why this question is worthy of study. So choose one of the following options among many, but we're going to talk about 3 today. Those include questioning the question, sparking curiosity with the source, and contextualizing within the compelling question. First, we'll start with questioning the question. In this task, teachers will provide 45 seconds to 60 seconds for students to individually or in groups to list out questions they have about the question they're going to study. Provide another 45 to 60 seconds for students to rank those questions of what they deem most important, i.e., what is the most important question we can ask a supporting question for the lesson for us to better understand what the lesson question is asking. Then provide 60 seconds or so for groups to share out their top questions. This provides teachers with the needed opportunity to A, find out what prior knowledge students might have, how they are looking at questions, and giving them practice in question asking itself. If needed then, once students are able to share out, teachers are able to address any kind of misconceptions that might arise. When the teacher as facilitator comes into that role, do not worry about addressing all the questions, right? We all don't know which questions are the most worthy of our time, and we've only got so much time. So the idea of prioritizing questions now becomes one of the skills and one of the focal points that we have when doing a lesson. Also, you can provide opportunities for students' questions when communicating conclusions. If a student has a great question and you feel like the sources or the discussion really merit being able to answer it, then please allow the students to replace the lesson question that you began the day with one of their own, or with a peer. In an elementary example for first grade, we have a supporting question: how do people change their community? I did this with my son, who's a first grader, and really I had to break this down for him to look at the three major parts of the question. People, change, community. My son came up with, well, what are their names? Which is a total kid answer. He also said, well, where do these people live? Which is very important to understand which people we're talking about when it comes to the types of communities. Because if you'll notice for community, well, what are the different communities that are there? When it comes to change, he wants to know if the change is going to be good or bad. And then ultimately, his final question is, well, why do we change to begin with? And all these are legitimate questions that students should have around a question about how do people change their community. I also have a fifth grader, and we were looking at the question, how did Bacon's Rebellion shift the colonies towards race-based enslavement? These are the questions that my fifth grader posed to me whenever I gave her the task of trying to come up with what are the types of questions that you might ask to better understand this larger question. As you can see, these are fantastic questions by a 10-year-old, and some that merit more discovery. Some of these will be answered during the lesson. If they're going to be answered during the lesson, then just say, you know what, you guys are fantastic, you guys are already thinking way ahead of where we're going to be going inside the lesson. If they are not, now a teacher has to make a choice whether or not those questions are worthy of more time inside of the class. Taking a look at a middle school example, how did trans-Saharan trade lead to West African wealth and success? You can see here that there's a lot of different types of questions that we might want to pose first and foremost before diving in and accepting this kind of question. It allows us as a group of students inside of the civic space to make sense of the language and develop a common language through which we're going to investigate the question. For high school, looking at the question, how does housing reveal economic inequities in Louisville? Again, you can see the variety of questions that we might go into to discuss everything from housing costs, the types of jobs, to where transportation exists, to how dense the population is. These are very rich questions which merit breaking them down. And there might be a panic moment where we say there's too many questions. And you're absolutely right. We have to prioritize which questions are the most worthy of our and our students' time. So this is just one way of beginning your class that does not take that much time, but provides enormous amounts of feedback, both for the question and the types of understanding that your students bring to the table and want to bring to the table, while giving them an opportunity to ask questions themselves. The second type is sparking curiosity with a source. For this, we're going to use a very specific strategy called Visual Thinking Strategies, VTS. In this task, you'll choose a source that might spark curiosity for the supporting question. Then, in your whole group, describe what's going on. And these are students, by the way, describing. Then, only after they describe those merits, can analysis of the source begin. Some of our students, right, are real quick with being able to try to analyze immediately. But until students are able to slow themselves down with describing everything that's there, their analysis may be incomplete. We want to make sure that we provide space for all of our students to be able to really take in what the source is giving them before they start analysis. The questions to ask during VTS are just these three, and you're going to ask them a lot. What's going on in the source? What do you see that makes you say that? What more can you find? These are going to be questions that you continue to prompt students with as you're using these questions to spur their description, to spur their analysis. So when it comes to you as a facilitator, make sure that you paraphrase each student's response. That way you really honor what the student is saying. Don't try to change what the student said. Really try to figure out what is at the heart of what's going on. This really honors what that student is bringing, right, to the table. Point to details when your students mention them. Make them prove, right, either yourself or another classmate. Make them prove where it is that another student is mentioning, right, by pointing to those details so that everybody can see the same thing. That will help elicit a lot more conversation. You might disagree with students, and some of the responses might not be logical. That's okay. That will work itself out as students begin to talk and analyze what's going on. We have to put everything on the table, even some of the bad ideas. But ultimately, right, before you transition to something else, you as a teacher will have to say, and being able to clear up any kind of misconceptions. With that said, don't be tempted to try to summarize or to review everything that was said by the students. This is a very powerful and empowering process, and oftentimes that summation and review is not needed because of how in-depth you'll go with the students. A few examples here. An elementary example. Let's say we begin this question, why do things we use come from different countries? With this source, we might ask students, what's going on here? After several responses, what makes you say that? Make them use evidence that they're seeing. Make them point to the photo of where they are getting their description. And then finally, the third question, what more can you find? Which prompts further inquiry. For a 7th grade example, how did the physical environment impact trade in West Africa? Again, a source here, using to try to spark curiosity. What's going on? What makes you say that? And what more can you find? Again, your role here as a facilitator is to pull out from student conversation while not trying to over-explain what's happening. Let them try to figure it out. And finally, as a high school example, how did organizations of the civil rights movement achieve their goals? You might say, what's going on? Looks like people are blowing smoke in somebody else's face. What makes you say that? 2 people are on either side of another individual and they're all blowing smoke in the person's face, right? What more can you find out, right? Or what more can you find? These are the types of questions that are leading to this, so that ultimately we're able to use a question or a source like this to really spark some curiosity, so that folks understand, at least in this source, that part of the reason why nonviolent protests were so powerful is that they actually put themselves through some of the violence in order to better prepare for it. The third way is contextualizing with a compelling question. Contextualizing within the compelling question can be done in a couple ways. The first is to provide 60 to 90 seconds for students to individually or in groups to make connections between the lesson supporting question of that day and the unit compelling question that you've been studying. Because ultimately, remember, it is supporting questions being scaffolded over time that builds the knowledge for students to be able to answer the compelling question. So in this case, we're just stopping for a moment and saying, what do you anticipate is going on? You could also use yesterday's supporting question at the beginning of the class so that it helps frame where we are in our learning for the compelling question. Contextualizing within the compelling question is really about where are we in the terms of our learning when it comes to building our knowledge towards the compelling question. Therefore, maybe you don't want to look at the compelling question. Maybe it's still too fuzzy. Maybe it's earlier on in the unit. Therefore, provide students with 90 to 120 seconds, right, 1.5 to 2 minutes, for students to make connections between previous and future supporting questions. That way they're able to see a clear, linear thinking of the types of questions that are building knowledge to the compelling question. Then you share out in whole group for however long you'd like. Teacher as facilitator, you could build with just the previous or the next question, right? So this is a modification. Maybe you look at just yesterday's question and today's question. Maybe you took a look at today's question and reference it to tomorrow's question. It doesn't have to be across multiple questions. You could just start small. Teachers can also use this as an ongoing formal assessment to determine how students are progressing as you move along. If they're able to recall and to apply what they've been talking about in the previous supporting questions, that should give the teacher and the student confidence that their learning is progressing in the right way. So let's take a look at a few examples. Let's say that in an elementary example, how do you make a government responsible? And the supporting question, what are the powers and responsibilities of the judicial branch? you're probably already anticipating which question came before and which questions comes after. But first, let's take a look at how this question relates to the larger question. How do you make a government responsible? Maybe individuals could be talking about, well, what is the judicial branch? What is its purpose inside of a government? And oftentimes this is from prior experience or from prior learning. Again, you're just taking a moment to pause and make a connection from one question to a much larger question. Maybe you want to do this with the compelling question. Maybe you want to do it with just looking at the other supporting questions. So here we have our question for the day. What are the powers and responsibilities of the judicial branch? But that it's sandwiched between, what are the powers and responsibilities of the executive branch? And number 9, how do checks and balances ensure government is responsible? Imagine giving students the opportunity to say, what is our thinking when it comes to this? What are we seeing as a connection? As you can probably tell, right, the question before supporting question number 7 was, what are the powers and responsibilities of the legislative branch, right? So you're trying to figure out what is this larger thinking that students are doing over time, right? Making connections before, making connections after. Let's take a look at a middle school example. How did racist policies divide the country? If we're looking at how did enslavers use the government to their advantage, we can make a connection to the larger idea about how enslavers are using the government, right, to their advantage, which means they're probably creating racist policies that will divide a state or divide an area or ultimately divide the country, depending on which level of government you're referring to. Well, how does enslavers using the government to their advantage apply to the previous question we just looked at about popular sovereignty in the Kansas-Nebraska Act and how that led to division, right? Again, our students are trying to do anticipatory, predictive thinking during this exercise. Or ultimately, how do you think today's lesson about enslavers using the government to their advantage is going to relate to how new political parties address the division in the United States? We can probably make some educated guesses about where the enslavers are in some of those parties. With our high school example, how did the Industrial Revolution negatively impact the environment? What would students be able to say when it comes to development meaning progress? What would they be wrestling with when it comes to looking at the Industrial Revolution and what was talked about previously and its connections to the environment? Additionally, we could look at what was going on before. How did traditional agricultural societies change because of the Industrial Revolution? And what connection does that have then when it comes to the environment? Or we could be looking forward. How did the Industrial Revolution negatively impact the environment? How did the Industrial Revolution reshape hierarchies in society? Now we're sort of seeing the long reach of the Industrial Revolution just by looking at the questions themselves. Finally then, how do we bring attention to the compelling and supporting question? This is where we began our day. Looking at the idea that our questions are not ornamental, that they are the engines that drive our thinking, that sometimes we have to begin that thinking immediately by engaging the supporting question when it comes to supporting questions, or staging the compelling question when it comes to compelling questions. That's why it's so important to begin every inquiry with something that's going to get students' attentions where they can get buy-in and have their voice immediately when the class begins. While this matters is because, remember, our goal in social studies is to build democratic classrooms, and that part of our disposition is making space for students to be able to share their voices and have greater agency as they begin an inquiry process so that they can move towards creating arguments and action. Thank you. And this has been How Do I Engage Students by Engaging in the Supporting Question. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
No. Another great session from Ryan New. I appreciate Ryan and the social studies team, Rebecca and Vincent, all of you all for being on the chat and help monitoring that, as well as the rest of the CDLI team. I forgot to say thank you in our last ELA session to Sandra and Suzanne and Dominique for doing that as well. I know we have a few minutes. I see Melissa just popped on. Morning, Melissa. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you guys are going to round us out this morning, I think, for our last session. But while we have just a minute, Melissa, I'm going to pop over here to the Digital Learning Channel schedule and just let everybody take a look. I know you and Paul are going to be here in just a minute or so, going to be talking about visual and performing arts for us. And then we are going to have a lunch break actually until 1 o'clock today. But this afternoon, we'll be hearing about more music and theater, building a mathematical community, high school science routines and expectations, and building community in a high school ELA workshop. So that is how it's going to round out this afternoon, starting at 1. And Melissa, how do you feel about having just a few extra minutes this morning and getting started a little bit early? Would that be okay?
I don't mind at all. Let me do a quick check with Paul because we are co-presenting to see if,
well, we can wait.
If he's able to log in. Okay. Give him a quick text. And then while he's doing that, I'll go ahead and get our presentation set up.
Sounds good.
All righty.
Hey, Melissa, are you going to be handling the slides today?
Yeah, I'll be running the slide deck.
Don't forget, once you hit present mode, to turn on those closed captionings for those people watching on YouTube.
Absolutely.
There's Paul coming in right now.
Excellent.
Hey, excellent. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
All right, so let me go in here and share my screen.
And then Melissa, if you click on hide, you see that little...
Yeah, gotcha.
Yep, and then close cap. Yep, your captions are on. It looks good. I will turn it over to the two of you. Thank you for being here this morning.
Hang on, let me double check here. I think I accidentally hit the exit. There we go.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning for the Visual and Performing Arts viewpoint of building a positive classroom community and culture and utilizing routines and expectations. I'm Melissa Gano, and I'm the District K-12 Arts Instructional Lead over Dance, Theater, and Visual Arts.
And I'm Paul Robinson, District K-12 Music Instructional Lead.
Yeah, our emails are here on this particular slide, but you'll have access to our slide deck. We do have some hyperlinks. So feel free to email us at any time if you have any future questions or support needs. So today, when Paul and I were planning this presentation, again, we just looked at this morning's general session at 8:30. And we just built from the 3 essential questions from that general session. How might we provide equitable access and set up every student for success? How might we create a sense of belonging in a positive NTI learning community? And how might we establish and sustain routines and expectations to foster and elevate student voice? And so we're going to address those 3 essential questions from the viewpoint of the visual and performing arts.
So we begin with equitable access and setting students up for success. which involves both systems and organizing the NTI space for student learning. And this is sort of the equivalent to setting up your physical classroom. So there are things that are beyond your control, just like in the physical classroom, but those include for NTI, make system, we're using Google Classroom. It includes approved digital tools and programs, student and parent communication tool, and school schedule and administrative expectations. But let's focus on the things that are in your control. These things include organizing Google Classroom planning, planning units and lessons, establishing clear routines and expectations, including community building strategies and activities, and communicating with families and providing timely feedback to students. For the arts, equitable access includes these 4 things, which we'll look at now. Arts teachers need to know student access and how to maintain art supplies, musical instruments, and equipment in order to plan instruction. What supplies and equipment do your students have to create, present, perform with dance, music, theater, and visual arts? Is there or was there a plan to distribute art kits and musical instruments to students? And if so, what is the plan for maintaining these items once they're in students' hands and homes? Consider surveying students as to what they have at their houses that they can use. Also, some teachers have used a scavenger hunt activity as part of a lesson to survey what students have and can use, making sure the students have parental permission to use it, of course. Next, in terms of equitable access to technology, what technology students have access to is important for all teachers to know, not just visual and performing arts teachers. The Chromebooks were offered to all students. Not all took advantage of that. So, do all of your students have the same access to technology, and what do they have? Chromebooks, iPads, or just phones? What about access to Wi-Fi? Are there any barriers or limitations, such as having to share a laptop with a sibling, or only being able to attend synchronous live meetings on certain days and times? Remember, our students are in varying situations. They're not all at home. Some are at daycares, community centers, or working from parking lots and cars. So do all of your students have access to the digital tools you'll be using? Nearpod, Jamboard, Collabora, and others. Some devices, keep in mind, cannot download or operate certain apps or programs. And all of these things need to be taken into account when considering students' access to technology.
Okay, next, I'm going to talk about instructional time, due dates, and the feedback loop, particularly for our elementary and middle school visual and performing arts teachers. They have to deal with the fact that they're seeing every student in the school either all in one week or in some period in terms of how the rotation is set up. We actually have probably, just taking for example the elementary schools, more than 20 various schedules that are set up. Paul and I did share in terms of the district NTI plan, some sample schedule that students could use, but what's in your control as the teacher and for our visual performing arts teachers. So regardless of your school schedule, and no matter whether you're teaching elementary, middle, and high, how much instructional time will you have with all of your students in classes? Will the day of the week that you see students and provide synchronous instruction affect your instructional time, as well as due dates? How will the day of the week that you have a live class meet affect a due date? So this is a chart that we provide to our arts teachers just because we have to look at the calendar and determine how many actual class periods are you going to have with students. So here at the elementary level, we are in quarters by grading period, so you can see they're not exactly the same. But more importantly, the second half of this chart is when you break down instructional days by the day of the week. Whatever day you see those students, even in the NTI world, if you have synchronous lessons with students, certain grades or certain class periods only on Monday, then, for example, this first 2 quarters up to winter break, you only have 16 class periods versus classes that you have on Tuesday, you're going to have 18 class periods. So every year, whether we're in brick and mortar or NTI, elementary, as well as middle and high, have to look at actually how many class periods and how the day of the week affects planning instructional time and due dates for assignments. So this next slide is the same concept in terms of information for middle and high. Again, just look at the second half. You know, if you have classes, synchronous classes on Mondays versus Mondays and Wednesdays versus Tuesday and Thursday, those do not equal out. If you're on a rotating block schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, or red and blue days, however school says that, your Monday and Wednesday students, middle and high, if you're following that type of schedule, you only have for the whole year following that schedule 68 class periods versus a Tuesday, Thursday schedule that you're going to have 72. So it's really important for teachers in planning and developing that system to know exactly how much instructional time they're going to have with students. And with all of these, this is also going to affect due dates. So if you introduce a lesson with some classes for the week on Mondays, but you don't get to that lesson with another group or another class until Wednesday, having the due date be Friday is not equitable. So visual performing arts teachers, as well as all special area related arts teachers, have to take into account making it as equitable as they can in terms of due date. So that may be a weekend due date, or the due date may be when they see them the following week. So, in terms of equitable access to assignments, there are questions that all teachers need to ask themselves when they are planning instruction and setting up their online classroom environments. So where are students going to go to find their weekly assignments? Do they immediately have to go to Google Classroom? Is it really posted on a Bitmoji slide that shows up in another place? For elementary, do they go first to their homeroom teachers to find that link? Also, you know, I do encourage any teacher, put yourself in the shoes of students or their parents and guardians and ask, how easy is it to find and follow weekly or multi-week, aka unit assignments? Where will live class meeting links be posted? I know this is sometimes an issue at the elementary level where, particularly for the lower grade levels, K1 and 2, those meeting links might not be posted in the Google Classroom. They may be posted in the homeroom teacher, for example. But just knowing you need to have a system, and in this case, a routine of where students and their parents and families know where to go to get information so that they have equitable access to finding and completing work. Also, another thing is for teachers and working with visual performing arts teachers, since, for example, the elementary level, we have visual art and general music teachers who have anywhere from 400 students to 1,200 when they are teaching truly itinerant. They have two schools. So definitely teachers need to establish boundaries. When are you, the teacher, available? When are you going to respond to emails or questions? Are those questions coming solely through Google Classroom? And finally, when will you grade assignments? The big takeaway in talking with my visual art performing arts teachers and giving them advice when they've been totally stressed out about the amount of work is don't make yourself available 24/7. Set those boundaries. Another thing that I just wanted to show, a couple of quick slides, is going back to organizing Google Classroom. I've seen several arts and non-arts teachers Google Classrooms, and when you go to the classwork section, assignments aren't, they're not using the topic session. And for me, pretending that I'm a student or a lay person that's not an educator, how does this make any sense? What week was which assignment assigned? So I have definitely encouraged, visual and performing arts teachers to use those topics under the classwork section in Google Classroom to note that day of the week that assignment or group of tasks have been assigned. Then you have the assignment, which this is Art Elements and Principles of Design. The other big important thing is where can students and family know what's expected without watching a video, opening a slide deck. So here in Google Classroom, since that's our learning management platform, do a short description there of what are those tasks for that week's lesson or lessons. And then list what materials, and particularly for visual performing arts, are they going to need a particular instrument? For visual art, are they going to need particular art supplies to make art during the synchronous session or also asynchronously in creating artwork? Okay, Paul?
Thank you. When it comes down to it, are you setting students up for success? We'll discuss these factors more in addressing the next two essential questions for this presentation, but we want to highlight a couple of them briefly. First, are you planning units and lessons so all students can be successful? This includes differentiation of both the content of the learning and the delivery of that content. Begin with the end in mind and consider how will you support your students where they are in their various circumstances, understandings, and skills. When we're in person, also, you may get a few students from time to time who have no idea what your class is about or even a completely incorrect idea of what happens in your class. Now, you'll need to support all your students in understanding what your class is in NTI, which is a class for creating, presenting, and performing, responding, and connecting in your areas of the arts. So when it comes to planning units and lessons for student success, teachers should use the district visual performing arts curriculum frameworks. They should use the Understanding by Design framework to consider goals and assessments before planning the tasks. They should scaffold instruction and provide step-by-step instructions in student-friendly language, both orally and written. And this is based on research and the various student learning styles. Also, they should consider the format of their presentation. Don't cram too much information on one slide or document. Use a slide instead for each step of the task. And finally, make slide decks or documents engaging by using interactive tools and strategies. Slide decks or Pear Deck or Nearpod 2 can provide a multitude of interactive features from drag and drop to drawing on the slide. When planning for any online learning, reference the district strategic planning tool. And on this slide, there are hyperlinks to the NTI strategic planning tool tailored for dance, music, theater, and visual art. So that brings us to our second essential question. Let's address the importance of creating a sense of belonging in a positive NTI learning community. Here are some strategies commonly used by visual and performing arts teachers to create that sense of belonging and build community. First, there's getting to know you activities. You can design assignments or activities where students can share what they want you and their peers to know about them. For instance, all about me activities, my favorite things, things that discuss their identity as well as what they envision for themselves for the future. And you can also use drama and theater games in any classroom to build community in the sense of belonging. You can start low risk and move towards higher risk. Collaborative assignments are another thing that you can use. You can start with collaborative assignments where students pair up and then work towards larger collaborative group work. So it's starting small, building trust, and then expanding. Again, start with lower risk and move toward higher risk. We also want to make sure our students are the driver of our learning. And there's some ways that we can do this. We can identify common student interests. You can do this by a survey about student interests or having students determine topics or themes for assignments. Students can brainstorm themes for units and lessons, and not only does that give them ownership, but it also helps them find commonalities amongst their peers. You can also utilize students to co-plan projects, and you can train students to lead activities, especially routine activities. Positive peer assessment and feedback is another strategy. Critiques, and peer feedback, and don't forget to have clear expectations and routines for those critiques and feedback and practice them. An example of this is I notice, I value, I wonder. Positive teacher-initiated reinforcements and recognitions can be communicated to both students and their families. In the general session, they went over teacher-initiated behaviors, and those can be used. Student recognitions can also be used, such as Star Student, Student of the Week, etc., making sure all students get recognized at some point. And for elementary, you may be able to simplify by coordinating with the homeroom teacher system for recognition and having particular students of a day. Another strategy is having a system for showcasing work and tasks. You can use Google Slide Decks, Google Sites, a YouTube channel, Padlet, and others. And these can also include virtual and/or live exhibitions and performances. And don't forget, you can always use non- and/or cross-curricular activities like community service learning projects, social time and events, lunch bunch, for example, or what my sixth grader calls chill time with friends, that his teacher organizes for them. Asynchronous in-progress check-ins can also be utilized to provide feedback and comments beyond just written feedback, such as utilizing embedded videos and audio recorded feedback like Mote. And finally, anything you can do to create the sense of a physical classroom can help students feel familiar and safe. Virtual backgrounds with a photo of actual classroom behind. Teacher desk and instructional space set up to look like a teacher's space. That can include posters, educational tools, objects, art supplies, easels, musical instruments and equipment, stage curtains, etc. These things can help the students feel like they belong.
So the final essential question that we're going to address is about establishing and sustaining routines and the expectations to foster and elevate student voice. So these are almost two separate practices that really work together. So first and foremost, establishing and sustaining routines and expectations. We've got an image here of a book. It's really targeted towards elementary, though it's much of the information within that, which includes routines, expectations, and various strategies in setting up a positive classroom or a responsive classroom environment is applicable to middle and high, and it's also the information that is adaptable to the NTI environment. Many of our elementary teachers have actually participated in a PD where we did a book study utilizing that book last year. So, teachers need to intentionally plan what the students and they, the teacher, are going to be doing to synchronous learning. So it's utilizing that classroom instructional framework for the visual and performing arts, really and truly, that looks almost the same as in the NTI environment. So what is the teacher doing with the students, having the students do the moment that they show up to the synchronous live class meet? How are they introducing a new lesson or a new concept or technique? How are they demoing work, which many of you have probably seen, particularly for my visual arts teachers. They've got like three screens going, plus a camera that's face down so that they can demo a drawing or painting or construction, sculptural or ceramic kind of technique to show students. Or for the performing arts, everyone has seen, the Brady Bunch screens of multiple students who are performing together. Make sure that we're making sure that our visual and performing arts teachers are really clear about what routines they do need to create in the NTI world and what they need to do in terms of continually returning and practicing those particular routines. This also includes how they're managing that online physical learning space or the physical learning space that the students in themselves, and also using nonverbal signaling as well as students. Again, our teachers, any teacher needs to return to these routines every time, otherwise why call it a routine? We're also encouraging, particularly for elementary special area teachers, which include our visual arts and general music teachers, is to coordinate and connect with the students' homeroom teachers and see what are those rules and routines and take those into consideration when they're making their routines. They might just want to use most of those, or particularly in terms of, what's your starting routine? What do you do when you're beginning instruction in a particular content area in the homeroom? And then the other thing is keeping it fun. So many of our visual performing arts teachers, we're really good at performing. So they'll incorporate singing, they'll incorporate some acting, some call and response within these routines. One, it's a great mnemonic device in terms of getting it into permanent memory in any content area, but also in terms of the arts, it's important for our students to, again, be performing. The other thing is with our visual performing arts teachers, we have actually a fair number of routines because we have many different processes and techniques, and each of those may come with a particular routine of either behavioral expectations or technical expectations. So our teachers have to start, just like any teacher should be starting small with just a couple and then add them over time as they come to that new concept or technique that needs its own routine or set of expectations. Also, kind of going back to organizing, the teacher has to have their own routine and convey that to students and their families. When are assignments going to be posted? When can they access those? And then how will the students submit work? This is huge for visual performing arts because we have artwork that's being photographed and teaching kids how to photograph work and how do you upload it. Are you adding it to a Google Doc? Are you adding it to a Google slide deck? Are you doing recordings? Are those recordings also, for example, going into a Google slide deck? Or is the work, is in some cases, just for ease of viewability, are you using some other digital tool like maybe Padlet for the student to upload work to look at for a particular assignment? But having the students and the parents know, this is where I go and when I can access assignments so I can do them synchronously and or asynchronously, and how I, the student or the parent or sibling or someone else who is assisting, particularly the younger students, how am I going to submit that work? The other thing is for visual performing arts, we definitely, same for non-arts content areas, we have routines for independent and collaborative work. We utilize, students have to know how to work together, particularly for the three performing arts, dance, music, and theater. Those you don't typically have people working solo in isolation, which in visual arts, you have that happening a fair amount. But for performing arts, students, you have to build, again, trust, utilize the various techniques and strategies that not only Paul and I have included in this presentation, but in the general session, and even some of the things that the other content areas have brought up work completely for visual performing arts as well. Next, fostering and elevating student voice in visual performing arts. So there's four big things that we'd like to really focus in on when we're talking about how we're using routines and procedures to foster and elevate student voice in visual performing arts. One, we got to create a safe space. So as a visual art teacher, how are you creating that sense of belonging and community when you have new students, perhaps particularly at elementary and middle, or even sometimes at the high school level, a new rotation of students coming in? You're having to start basically from scratch versus homeroom classroom teachers that are not on a rotation schedule. So how are you making students feeling safe to share ideas and work? For visual performing arts, students are really putting themselves out there. They are creating work, they're having to work to create performances for dance, music, and theater. And when they're sharing ideas and working with others, we definitely want to make sure that we don't end up and create a situation that the student feels like they could be bullied. And that really is in terms of talking to students in visual performing arts. That's one of the main reasons why they don't participate or are reluctant to participate in some things, because they're afraid that they'll be bullied by other students. So we definitely want to make that a safe space, start with low risk, build high risk, as we've mentioned earlier in this presentation. And then how much freedom do your students have to share in opinions and ideas? Is anything up for grabs? Is there anything unacceptable? I know in visual performing arts we're all about, creative freedoms, but there's certain things that are just unacceptable. We are not going to have anything that promotes hate. So that's in terms of all visual performing arts. You might address hate issues in some way through creating a painting or creating a particular dance, but the key word there is promote. We are not going to promote hate. Scaffolding choice. Visual performing arts teachers need to definitely, and it's inherent within our disciplines, that we are providing students choice. But we really use the gradual release model. We scaffold, starting with the younger kids, so that by the time they go to high school, and if ideally they've been having the arts as they should since kindergarten all the way up to high school, there should be that that's already built in by the time they got to high school about being able to work with choice. You can't just throw everything at them. So let's say it's a visual arts classroom and you're doing following a pedagogy such as choice-based education or teaching artistic behaviors in visual arts. Those are basically similar, but one of multiple pedagogies for visual arts. If a teacher just ends up and immediately with the group says, oh, I'm setting up all of these different stations, you're going to create an artwork that deals with this particular theme, blah, 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 and it sets the kids loose. Then the next thing you know, which I have experienced it, where kids actually got into a physical fight, fighting over materials. So you have to actually teach kids about how to positively and respectively participate in choice-based learning. There's also a place, I know sometimes, I hear some people say, oh, there's just too much, the teacher, I do, you do, we do. Well, in the arts, there's techniques that students need to learn that do require that. Examples, guided practice to learn various watercolor techniques, steps and movements to perform. And then the third thing, providing opportunity, include opportunities for choice, self-expression, personal interest. You use overarching prompts versus singular topics or things. What if all students don't want to create or work around the theme of social justice? What if instead you used a prompt or a big idea, have an artist address issues that matter to them? Encourage connections. Again, students need to connect to the lesson and task. Give them choice. Involve them in designing the lesson, aka selecting topics or creating prompts. Use questioning techniques to encourage reflection, investigation with all help. Students can create work with a personal voice and vision.
In conclusion, we hope to have provided further insight into building a positive NTI classroom culture and community through the lens of a visual performing arts teacher. Take a look at the resources slide. There are some hyperlinks to additional visual and performing arts resources from some arts organizations, which will support further learning on today's topic and the 3 essential questions. And with that, we thank you for attending our presentation and checking out the recording. If there's any questions, remember you can email us. Our emails were at the beginning of the presentation, which you can reference on slide 2 of this presentation slide deck. I want to thank Melissa Gano for co-presenting with me, and I want to thank Jack Bosley for moderating. So everyone, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Paul and Melissa. It was a great session. I really like how the practical advice that you all gave out with schedules and planning units and just reminding them about those planning tools that are available to them. And one of the things that I was just reminded of, Melissa, when you were talking about the visual arts with photography, and I added like video and digital art, how that can be connected back into one of our favorite initiatives, at least in the tech world, with the digital innovation team, and that's STLP. There's a whole category of these items with STLP called DPOJ. It's Digital Projects Online Judging, and your group of teachers, I feel like STLP is primarily aimed at our lab teachers and tech teachers at schools, but you all could contribute, your teachers could contribute so much there. So just wanted to remind everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, particularly I'll just speak to visual arts teachers. We've got 41 K-12 visual arts competitions on average each year that students are participating on. Some of them are massive and huge, the most prestigious. They deal with scholarship dollars at the high school level, etc. Even in this NTI world, those events, those competitions are still going on, and it's also applicable to dance, music, and theater. Kids are performing in community, state, and national events during NTI, and our teachers are working tirelessly to make sure students are creating that work and putting their best foot forward and showcasing quality work.
Yes, yep, it's an important reminder to that students are still actively doing all that, even in these virtual settings. So Paul, thank you. Melissa, really appreciate the time and you all sharing all your advice and insights. So
appreciate it.
Fantastic.
So before I leave out for our lunch break, I just wanted to show everybody one more time. Here's the schedule. We're going to be coming back live at 1 o'clock, and here's just a brief look at that schedule one more time. Again, you can find this schedule and all the links to the presentations from our presenters today on the teacher side of the NTI website. But anyway, just know that our team and the panelists that we're on today, we are here to support you. If you have any questions, just reach out to us or them. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you back at 1 o'clock.